Chapter 865. 2 days later, Roland Wimbledon's fleet arrived at the dock of Redwater City. Earl Delta, who had already received the news, attached great importance to it. He not only sent people to clean the dock from inside to outside, but also hung silk satin and colored flags in eye-catching places. On the day of arrival, he personally led the crowd out of the city gate and welcomed them in the suburbs. His attitude was much more cordial than when the First Army visited. As great nobles in the central region, George Neri and Guy Urian were naturally in the welcoming line. It had to be said that the new king's extravagance was really eye-catching. It was not the first time that George had seen the steel ship named after Prince Roland, but it was still shocking to see it again after more than half a year. There were many more stone ships neatly lined up behind. The snow-white chimneys blended with the thick smoke, like a row of pillars supporting the sky. When the soldiers in the same uniform filed down the dock, he could not help but feel a surge of envy. If the Rock family also had such an army to serve him, he could even look forward to the throne in the hall of the king's city, let alone Redwater City. "This fool, I really don't know how he's enlightened," George spat. 5 or 6 years ago when I was in the king's city, he was obviously the most unbearable one. Not to mention compared to the few eldest sons, even his little sister who was still wet behind the ears looked better than him. Doesn't this show that Prince Roland is the one who hides the most? The Earl of Tri-River shrugged. To be able to stand out in the borderland and develop to the point where it is today, it's not something a fool can do. Remember to put on a smiling face later and try to show as much enthusiasm as possible. "Of course I know," George replied indifferently. "Even if he's really a fool, I'll do my best to fight against a member of the royal family. You don't have to worry about this." "That's good." At this moment, a loud bugle sounded from the direction of the dock, and there was a commotion in the crowd. Without looking, it was obvious that the ruler of the western region, or the new king of Greycastle, Roland Wimbledon, had appeared. "How are the preparations on your side?" George asked calmly. 51 people have already entered," Guy said without turning his head, pretending to be looking forward to His Majesty's arrival. "In 2 days, the rest can also be arranged to enter. It's almost the same on my side." He raised the corner of his mouth slightly. "It seems that there's still plenty of time left. I'm more confident now." As for Roland's actions after entering Redwater City, he and Gay had discussed many times. The most likely one was to first reach an agreement with Earl Delta, and then announce the news of taking back the enfeoffment power. After all, Redwater City was a big city, and there were many nobles with territories around it, so it would be impossible to settle the battle as quickly as in Willowtown. Taking into consideration Delta's indecisive nature, this decision would probably cause him to toss and turn for 2 to 3 days before he could make a decision. In addition to waiting for the news to spread and the time for the other nobles' emotions to ferment, it would be enough for them to quietly fill the new secret passages with sufficient manpower. After that, as long as the midnight bell rang, they would rush into the castle together, rendering the snow powder weapons useless. With the absolute advantage in numbers and favorable terrain, Roland Wimbledon would not be able to escape. "He's here," Gay reminded. George immediately put on a smile and moved forward. The first row of the line was for the Lord's family members, and the second row was for the great nobles like them. Earl Delta was accompanying the new king, introducing the greeting with a fawning face. Seeing his round face, which was smiling so widely that his eyes could hardly be seen, and his double chin, which kept shaking, George felt nauseous. If he remembered correctly, when Timothy had led his army through Redwater City, the Lord had also flattered the second prince in the same way. "Your Majesty, this is the Lord of Rock Ridge, Earl George Neri." Earl Delta finally walked in front of him. "My respects to you, Your Majesty." George put his right hand on his chest, bowed deeply, and said in the most enthusiastic tone, "Rock Ridge is rich in the most mellow taste of tea and fruit wine. If you're willing to come, it would be my honor." "Really?" Roland's response was a little unexpected. "Where's your territory?" Shouldn't he show the attitude of a superior that he had received the greeting and would visit when he had time? But he quickly replied, "It's in the east of Redwater City. Walk 2 miles to the east, and under the first mountain you see is the territory of the Neri family. It sounds like a nice scenery. I hope you can cherish it." The new king patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Cherish it? What does that mean?" George frowned secretly, but he still maintained the same expression and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." Nothing unexpected happened during the greeting. When everyone had met Roland, Earl Delta announced that a grand dinner would be held at the lakeside villa that night, and then he ordered the knight to open the way in front and escort the king into the city. Everything went as he had planned, or even better. The new king's army did not swarm into Redwater City, but set up camp in the suburban dock area. Roland was accompanied by less than 100 guards. In this way, after moving into the castle, there were probably only about 20 people who could guard the bedroom at all times. The result was a foregone conclusion. But somehow, he felt a little uneasy. The smile on Roland's face did not seem to be a smile for him, but he could not tell the specific meaning of it. He just felt an inexplicable chill lingering in his heart. George shook his head and suppressed all the distracting thoughts in his mind. "Maybe I was just mistaken," he thought to himself. "Even if Roland has any ideas, they will disappear the moment he enters the castle. When the new king falls into my hands, I might as well talk to him about what happened today." At that time, he did not need to flatter him, and Roland should not be in the mood to show such a strange smile. The night came as scheduled. All the citizens knew that the last prince of the Wimbledon royal family was now in Redwater City, and he was very likely to be the king in charge of the whole Grey Castle. Therefore, it was like a festival in the city. The vast inner city was brightly lit, and the lakeside villa was even brighter. It had always been a place to entertain distinguished guests. The banquet hall was built on the big lake connected to the Redwater River, supported by dozens of century-old larch trunks, and connected to the shore by a trestle-like corridor. Running water could even be seen in the hall. In order to please the new king, Earl Delta spared no effort to serve all the seasonal delicacies in the surrounding areas, some of which even George had never seen before. But his mind was not on the food. In addition to paying attention to Roland Wimbledon's actions, he also needed to be wary of the nobles who were close to the Lord of Redwater City. When the new king appeared in the banquet hall, he could not help but frown. Chapter 866. Edu counted silently. There were a total of 10 people on the other side, which did not exceed the usual ostentation of the royal family. 6 of them were obviously guards, wearing short robes and leather pants that were convenient for movement. After entering the hall, they spread out and occupied several corners. It was not strange for the lord to have female guards. He kept 2 of them in his mansion. He did not expect them to be very powerful, but they were used to improve his taste, especially when he was hunting in the wild. Whenever he took off the leather armor that was more tempting than it was protecting and pressed the other party into the mud, he would always be in high spirits. But it was strange to bring them to such a formal occasion. There was an insurmountable gap in strength between women and men, which was determined at birth. Therefore, most of the outstanding guards and knight were male. No one would bring these vases as attendants when they were not looking for fun. What's more, these people's appearances were simply hard to look at. Edu was not picky, but no brothel in Redwater City would let such women in. Not only were their facial features ugly, but their skin was extremely rough. They seemed to be in their 30s or 40s, with wrinkles and dark spots that almost spread from their foreheads to their cheeks. Although their bodies were well proportioned after a long period of exercise, as long as one saw their faces, one would lose all interest. Did Roland Wimbledon like this kind of woman? However, when he looked at the woman who was holding the new king's arm, he immediately rejected his guess. She was a young woman who looked impeccable from every angle. Her lake blue eyes were like transparent gems, making it hard to look away. He had no doubt that they were the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. Her appearance brought a brief silence in the hall. Even Edith Cont, the pearl of the northern region, had not caused such an effect. If she had not been so close to the new king, most of the nobles would have swarmed to her. The last 2 wore veils, as if they did not want others to know what they looked like. It was not improper to dress like this, but it was very rare at a banquet. If they did not want others to see them, they could choose not to attend. This kind of dress would be more eye-catching. Would you like a glass of wine? At this moment, Guy came over with 2 glasses of wine. Thank you. He took the glasses and followed Guy to a corner of the hall. What did you find? The woman beside Roland is a little strange, Earl Tri-River whispered. Don't you think she looks a little too outstanding? You noticed that too? Edu touched the god's stone of retaliation on his chest and said calmly, I guess, she's probably a witch. I think so too. If she's a woman from a big family, it's impossible that we haven't heard of her. It was not a secret that Roland was recruiting witches. Similar news had spread from King's City to Redwater City. At first, it was only spread by rats. Later, when the King's City was changed and the church was uprooted, it became more and more popular. The persecution of witches and the like gradually subsided. No one wanted to annoy the new king because of this matter, but few nobles took the word recruitment seriously. In their view, witches played the same role as female guards. They were usually kept by their side to admire, and when needed, they could use witches at will. After all, the appearance of witches was obvious to all. Even when the church and Timothy strictly searched for witches, some people could not help but take risks. But it was hard to understand why he brought a witch to the banquet. Was it because the new king no longer worried about his private life after so many victories, or did he really think of that woman as? The second thought had just emerged, but Edu threw it to the back of his mind. Witches could not bear children, which alone made it impossible for her to become a legal wife. Bringing a witch to the banquet should be a whim of the king. But this was also good. When Roland fell into his hands, it would undoubtedly be an excellent, incriminating evidence. To put it lightly, it was a disregard for etiquette and aristocratic traditions. To put it more seriously, it was an insult to the women brought by other nobles. Of course, this accusation had little impact on the members of the royal family, but for the witch, it was an unforgivable felony. As for how to deal with it, it was up to him. The Earl of Tri-River obviously saw through his thoughts. He grinned and said, You can't enjoy it alone. I can forget anyone but you, my old friend. Edu raised his glass and said, I'll definitely let you enjoy it first. The two looked at each other for a moment and could not help but laugh. The banquet went smoothly. After toasting with the new king, it was time for free activities. The nobles gathered in groups according to their titles and genders. The men talked about the recent hunts, harvests, and romantic encounters, while the women talked about which shops had the smoothest silk and the most luxurious jewels. Edu Neri was also surrounded by many nobles. At least their momentum was no weaker than that of the Lord of Redwater City. Some of the former fence-sitters also came to his side. Apparently, they had heard the rumor that the new king was ready to take action against his fief. This made him feel more confident, and even the inexplicable uneasiness he had felt before was somewhat diluted. That was right, time was on his side. Roland Wimbledon was, after all, an outsider. If he wanted to make any changes, he would have to put in a lot of effort. The Rock family had been here for more than 100 years, and they were stronger at the right time and in the right place. The other side's underestimation of the enemy and arrogance intensified this point. He even felt that he and the Earl of Tri-River's attendants, as well as Leviathan and the others, could directly take down the new king. However, after thinking for a moment, Edu gave up this idea. After all, the lakeside villa was open on all sides, which was not good for defense. If an accident happened during the transfer, it would be easy to waste all the previous efforts. It was better to wait for the new king to enter the castle. In 2 days, the young king would be a bird in a cage. At this moment, Earl Delta suddenly clapped his hands and gathered everyone's eyes to the center of the hall. Everyone, please be quiet. His Majesty Roland Wimbledon has something to say to you. Is he going to give a closing speech? Edu carelessly put a piece of tender rib into his mouth. It seemed that the banquet was finally coming to an end. First of all, I have to thank the Earl for arranging this sumptuous banquet. I'm also very happy to see so many people invited to attend. Roland looked around the hall and said with a smile, If I remember correctly, almost all the nobles around Redwater City, big or small, are here, right? Seeing Roland's smile, Edu suddenly felt a chill in his heart. There he goes again, that smile without a smile. Although the corners of his mouth were raised, there was no emotion at all. What on earth is he thinking? Except for two who are not feeling well, all the other invitees are here, Your Majesty. Delta nodded. Chapter 867. What? George blinked and doubted his own ears for a moment. He looked at the Earl of Tri-River beside him and found that the Earl was also at a loss. For a moment, all the nobles looked the same as Guy. It was supposed to be an explosive news, but no one responded to it. This is not part of the plan. Has Earl Delta been persuaded by Roland Wimbledon in advance? He looked at the Lord of Redwater City, but the answer he got was no. The Earl's reaction was not much calmer than the others. He also stared at the new king in disbelief. Obviously, he did not know that the new king would do this when he arranged this banquet and invited everyone. For Delta, the trip to the lakeside villa was just a routine banquet. And the others also attended the banquet as usual. This was just Roland's unilateral action. Is he crazy? I think many of you already know that the enfeoffment system seriously hinders the mobility and division of personnel, thus restricting the development of productivity. Considering that Grey Castle, and even the whole human race will fall into a big crisis, I have to make a difficult decision, that is, to recover all the land and power, so that the people of Grey Castle can act together. Division of personnel? Productivity? Big crisis? George swallowed. What the hell is this guy talking about? Who knows these things? However, the new king did not seem to care about what they thought. He continued as if there was no one else present. For now, this decision is correct and necessary. The western region and the northern region of Grey Castle are successful examples. The disappearance of the enfeoffment did not cause a loss of order in the local areas. Instead, it became more orderly. The unified government decrees, planning, and deployment gradually changed the productivity from small family-inherited workshop production to large factory production. At the same time, it also created a lot of wealth. Those who actively participated in it have benefited greatly. This is an undeniable fact. I think you can see the results. I'm not saying this to uproot the nobles. I just want to tell you that losing the enfeoffment and title doesn't mean that you have nothing. Under the new system, you can get more opportunities. For example, if a cake is only the size of a palm, even if you swallow it all, you can only fill your stomach. However, if he could make it the size of a table, he would be satisfied even if he only ate a corner of it. Since the reform is beneficial to both sides, it is not difficult to understand why it should be promoted comprehensively. Regarding this matter, many of you have already known, right? Indeed, many nobles are aware of your intentions, but I didn't expect you to be so impulsive. George's mind spun rapidly. After the initial shock, he gradually calmed down and unexpectedly discovered that this unforeseen event was not a bad thing. Instead, it was very beneficial to him. With so many nobles present, it was almost impossible for them to reach a consensus. On the contrary, the conflict was triggered in advance, which saved him the effort of building up momentum after he took over the castle. After all, compared with persuading the Lord of Redwater City to act, this was too direct, and it was even easy to push those who originally supported Earl Delta to his side. Sure enough, after the nobles came back to their senses, someone said, "Your Majesty, I don't know much about the specific situation in the Northwest and Northwest. Can you give me a few days to think about it before giving you an answer? Yeah, this kind of thing is too important. I have a few relatives. I can't make the decision alone. Your Majesty, can you guarantee that each of us will get more wealth? If the reform fails and we lose our fiefs, doesn't it mean that we'll lose the original cake? Your policy is absolutely wise, but I'm not cut out for business, Your Majesty." That's right, that's it. Edu was secretly delighted. The more doubts there were, the more it showed his foresight and foresight. If the new king could not make the final decision, he would only be in a dilemma. However, Roland still maintained his original expression and waited for the nobles to speak at once. Then he raised his hand and silenced the noisy discussion. You seem to have made a mistake. What I said was not a suggestion, but an order from the king. Do you think it's a commodity on a shelf that you can bargain with here? The calmness in his voice faded a little and was replaced by a trace of coldness. I don't even need your consent. I know clearly who will stand on the carriage of the times and move forward with me, and who will become the stubborn stones that block the wheels and be crushed into powder. How? How do you know? Earl Delta asked in surprise. The smile on Roland's face grew wider. Because I can see through people's hearts. What did you say? It's normal to doubt something beyond your understanding. Roland turned to Edith and said, In that case, I'll demonstrate it to you. The Pearl of the Northern Region nodded and smiled at the nobles. Your Majesty's ability is easy to prove. As long as you repeat what I said, you'll immediately understand that no lie can be hidden under the mind-reading spell. The reason why the Wimbledon family could become the ruler of Grey Castle is precisely because they have mastered this ability. But I have to say something first. If you don't repeat what I said, you can only be treated as crushed stones. Farce. This is simply a farce. George Neri snorted in his heart. There's no such thing as mind-reading. If it were a witch, it would be more believable. However, he was still wearing the god's stone of retaliation, so he was not afraid of being bewitched by the demonic power. Although he wanted to call for everyone to boycott this farce, he found that few nobles in the crowd objected. From their expressions, it was not that many of them believed in this statement, but they were waiting for Edith to speak up, thinking that it would not hurt to give it a try. He did not know whether they wanted to see the new king make a fool of himself or did not want to completely offend him. Edith raised the corner of her mouth and said, Please listen carefully. The first sentence is, I fully agree with His Majesty's new policy and I'm willing to actively cooperate with the officials sent by Neverwinter. The nobles did not take it seriously and repeated what she said. Some could not help but chuckle. Obviously, they thought it was quite funny. None of them are telling the truth, Roland quickly answered. Although it's a pity, it's normal. If it were me, I probably wouldn't be so easily convinced by a king who stays in the border area of Grey Castle all year round. Please continue. Wait. Something is wrong. George frowned. Is there really a king who can accept this calmly? He was the Lord of Rock Ridge. Even though he knew that not all his subjects wholeheartedly obeyed him, he still did not want to hear them say so. Shouldn't he feel embarrassed and angry at this time? Why is Roland Wimbledon so calm? Chapter 868. This time, the situation changed. After the retelling, for people were led out of the crowd by the guards of the new king. The nobles could not help but be in an uproar. Your Majesty, this. You guessed it right. The four of them are telling the truth. Roland spread out his hands and said, Those who are willing to try are qualified to get on the train. In the face of change, the courage to try is the most valuable. Then he looked at the selected nobles and said, Do it well and don't miss the opportunity. Yes, yes. Your Majesty. The four people were flattered. Nonsense, George could not help but roar in his heart. Courage? Qualifications? Stop joking. These guys were just barren on the verge of poverty. Their territory was barren, their output was meager, they were not good at management, and they lacked manpower. This was the true portrayal of them. Of course, there was no reason to be reluctant to part with the land that could not make ends meet. The only reason they kept it was just to cover up their identity. Basically, they would not even receive an invitation to dinner. How could they be the focus of the new king? Or could it be that these people had long been in cahoots with Roland Wimbledon to play this absurd game? Wait. He suddenly thought of a rumor, a sensational story from King City. There were only a few people who personally experienced this story, but it was indeed related to Prince Roland. It was said that after he captured King City, he held a trial in the Holy Temple of the Twin Towers to judge the crimes of those great nobles. Judging from the aftermath, the nobles who held real power in King City were almost wiped out, and Timothy was sentenced to death by hanging. So it was not so much a trial, but rather an eradication of dissidents. However, the process was full of strange colors. It was said that Roland used a quiz game to convict the nobles. If one of the 10 questions was answered incorrectly, he would be sent to prison, and the basis of the arbitration was the legendary mind reading. At that time, George disdained this theory and thought it was just a rumor made up by the nobles who luckily escaped punishment to cover up their guilt and timidity. The so-called mind reading was just a judgment made by Roland based on his own preferences. Even if Roland did not stay in King's City in the end, he would not give those old ministers of Timothy a chance to make a comeback. But now, he found that he was a little uncertain. Could it be that the rumor was true? This is the third sentence. Listen carefully. Edith's voice sounded again. I don't want to give up my fief and power at all, but in the face of overwhelming power, I don't want to lose my life for them. She gestured to the crowd and said, Now it's your turn. The atmosphere in the hall gradually changed. Earlier, there were still people who did not care and repeated the speech casually. However, when the first batch of nobles received the approval of the new king and left the crowd, a strange feeling rose in everyone's heart. This time, even their replies were no longer neat. However, the guards still picked out more nobles this time. What made George Nary's heart sink was that Earl Delta was also among them. What's going on? Guy quietly moved to his side and asked in a low voice, Have they all been convinced by the new king? Edu secretly counted. A total of 21 people were brought out. Some of them were even standing in his mansion 2 days ago, discussing how to fight against Roland. Together with the nobles' attendants and servants, the crowd instantly shrank by half. No, it's impossible. If Roland contacted so many people, it's impossible that I didn't notice it. He gritted his teeth and said, They must have been selected at the last minute. Then, why didn't they say it? Baron Leviathan also came over. Khufu, that guy, was on our side before. Say what? Edu glared at him fiercely. Your Majesty, you're wrong. I value my fief more than anything else. I'm willing to sacrifice my life for it. If it were you, would you say it? What an idiot, he thought angrily. The problem was not the people who were selected, but the remaining nobles. Roland Wimbledon could choose the nobles with his eyes closed and then classify the remaining ones as oppressors. But how could he ensure that there were no people on the side of the Lord of Redwater City? Choosing the wrong ones would only push the remaining forces to the opposite side. This trick was almost meaningless except for alerting the enemy. Or does he just want to show off his mind-reading ability in front of everyone? Edu looked around the hall and once again confirmed that the new king had only brought 6 guards. Even if the new king reduced the number of people to 1 or 2 and wanted to make an example out of them, as long as they made a scene in public, the 6 guards would not necessarily be able to suppress them. At least, he and the Earl of Tri-River would not sit idly by. It's not an embarrassing answer to obey power. Roland smiled at the second group of nobles. Since ancient times, power has always been the basis for determining the hierarchy of human beings. The importance of sizing up the situation is no less than that of courage. Your ancestors were able to occupy a place in Grey Castle and pass on their bloodlines instead of being obliterated in the long river of history. This in itself is a proof of power. I'm very happy that you can inherit this. In addition, I also promise that you will not be treated differently from the first group of nobles. As long as you remember today's answer, if you encounter similar problems in the future, think about the power I have. Then he looked at the Pearl of the Northern region and said, Read the next sentence. Edith nodded and said, The 4th sentence, I don't want to give up on either side, nor do I know which one to choose. This statement was very short, but only 5 or 6 of the remaining nobles spoke. Most of them chose to remain silent because they had realized that they were being divided. Among those who repeated the story, the guard only picked out 3 of them. Ahem, Your Majesty, we believe that you can see through people's minds. Let's stop here. Yes, after all, this is a welcome banquet. You see. Earl Delta and the Earl of Tri-River tried to dissuade Roland. There are fewer neutrals than I thought, Roland said as if he hadn't heard anything. Wavering and hesitating isn't a good quality, especially in the midst of the ever-changing tide of change. But you belong to the category that can be reformed. Stay here for a while. Maybe you'll change your mind after a quarter of an hour. He paused and looked at the remaining nobles. Next is the last sentence. But I think you should have guessed its content, or rather, your thoughts. In this case, I'll say it myself. In any case, I'm not willing to give up my fief and power. For this, I'm willing to take risks. As long as I can overthrow the king, my family and wealth will live forever. At that moment, the bonfire seemed to move without wind. No one in the hall spoke and the air seemed to freeze. It doesn't matter if you don't answer. As I said before, this is not a suggestion, but an order. Roland said slowly, those who don't repeat are not qualified to go with me. Your path ends here. What do you mean? George's face darkened. There's no evidence, no trial, and only one sentence. Do you want to convict us? There were still 27 nobles left, which was far more than he had expected. According to their titles, each of them had 2 to 4 attendants, which added up to more than 60 people, including many reserve knight. What good would it do for the new king to force them to this point? Wasn't he afraid of getting himself into trouble? Your Majesty, if it's a joke, it's enough. Guy still put on a kind face and calmly advised, the last sentence is too serious. We can't bear it. How can you be sure that everyone thinks that way? At least I'll never betray the Wimbledon family. Yes. I'm wrong. I've never thought that way. Your Majesty, please investigate. The nobles shouted. You know what? The more you talk, the more you can distinguish truth from falsehood. Roland remained unmoved and took a crystal glass from Edith's hand. If you have anything to say, save it for shovel and oars. Oars? Yes, you'll be sent to the North Slope mine for 20 years for the crime of rebellion. After all, you're still plotting in your mind and haven't put it into practice yet. The new king's tone was mixed with a sense of danger. But if you resist, the rebellion will become a real action, and the mine will no longer tolerate you. Only death awaits all of you. At this point, he finished the wine in his glass in one gulp and casually threw the glass away. The glass arced through the air and fell at George's feet, breaking into pieces with a crash. Chapter 869. Crazy, this guy is absolutely crazy. George Neri could not believe that things would turn out this way. Why did the new king think that they would not resist and would just surrender? 6 people against more than 60 people? Could it be that these guards were made of iron? Even if they had witches, they had no chance of winning against the nobles who wore God's stones of retaliation. Following the new king's order, the 6 female guards did not rush forward together. Instead, 2 of them guarded the exit and in front of Roland, while the other 4 drew their daggers and approached the nobles step by step. The crowd suddenly heard the sound of swords being unsheathed. No one was willing to put down their weapons and kneel down to surrender under such a great disparity in strength. Your Majesty. The Lord of Redwater City turned pale. Calm down, everyone. We can talk about it slowly. It was too late. George and Guy looked at each other and immediately confirmed each other's thoughts. The plan had changed. They would fight in this manner. Although this place was not suitable for defense, almost all the nobles of Redwater City were here. As long as he could control Roland, he was sure that he could win most of them over to his side. As Prince Roland had said, strength was the standard to measure everything. Unfortunately, in the lakeside villa, strength was not on the side of the nobles. I can't accept it. Guy shouted and walked out of the crowd with a sword in his hand. He finally changed his kind and honest expression and became serious. If this is a trial with conclusive evidence, I have nothing to say. But this kind of ruling is like child's play. No real noble can accept it. Even if Wimbledon 3 asked me this, I still insist on this answer. Your Highness, you forced me to do this. Behind him, there were 4 tall attendants, each of whom stood with their heads held high, completely unafraid of the opponents being the nobles of the royal family. In terms of momentum, Earl Tri-River even overwhelmed the new king and his entourage. Well done, George thought to himself. Even the prince could not refute such a righteous declaration. The second half of the sentence included all the nobles and was encouraging and provocative. Next, as long as they could take down Roland, they would be able to settle the matter. And the other side definitely wouldn't have thought that this count, who was nearly 40 years old and already had half a head of white hair, was an absolute expert. Guy Julian was born with monstrous strength. At the age of 15, he led 2 night knights to wipe out a group of bandits at the mouth of the river. After he became an adult, he was even more proficient in all kinds of weapons, and it was difficult for him to meet a match in competitions between nobles. Some people called him Gay the Giant, and believed that if he was not a great noble but a knight, the history books would record the title of the strongest knight. As for the 4 attendants, all of them were at the level of a knight. As long as they could stall the new king's guard for a while, Roland Wimbledon would not be able to resist the Earl of Tri-River at all. "Go and help him," said George to his valet. "Keep an eye on Miss Edith." A few more people stepped out of the crowd. Facing Guy, who was striding forward, the smile on Roland's face did not diminish at all. Instead, it became more intense, as if he was completely unaware of the current situation. George could not help but clench his fists. "Laugh, this is also your last moment. You won't even have the chance to cry later. Go!" When the distance between the two sides was less than 10 steps, Guy suddenly sped up and slashed at the female guard with his sword. His strength was so great that people could even hear the whistling sound of the sword breaking through the air. This attack could only be dodged, not resisted. Once the guard stepped aside, there would be no one in front of Roland. Ding, stab. Then George heard 2 sounds. The former was the crisp and pleasant sound of metal colliding, and the latter was the subtle sound of the blade and the flesh touching each other. Half of the long sword flew into the air, spun several times in the air, and then stabbed into the wooden floor upside down. Then came the head of the Earl of Tri-River. It slid smoothly down from the neck and hit the floor with a thud. After bouncing twice, it stopped moving, and the blood from the stump drew a bright red arc. What the hell happened? How could the enemy cut off Giant Guy's neck with just one sword? How is this possible? However, before he came to his senses, there were sounds of swords clashing and chaotic screams around the crowd. The sword was like a signal, and the 4 female guards attacked from several directions at the same time, immediately setting off a storm of blood. George was horrified to find that these people were almost too fast to be seen with the naked eye, and their strength was astonishing. Anything in their hands could become a deadly weapon, even fists and fingers. It was as if the nobles were not fighting human beings, but steel statues. "Monsters, they are a group of monsters," he roared in his heart. "How could mortals train their bodies to such an extent? But if you try to resist, the rebellion will become a real action, and the mine will naturally not tolerate you anymore. Only death awaits you." At that moment, George Neri suddenly remembered the words of the new king. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed across his mind. Is this the moment he was waiting for? He turned his neck with difficulty and looked in the direction where Roland Wimbledon was standing. An irrepressible chill rose from the soles of his feet and went straight up his spine. At this moment, he found that he finally understood the meaning of that smile. This is a complete trap. He deliberately left the first army outside the city, only brought 100 guards with him, and only brought 6 guards with him to the banquet. He pretended to be stubborn and didn't give them any room to retreat. All these actions were just to lure them into attacking him. Escorting them to the mine? No. Roland did not intend to let the remaining nobles go. If they surrendered, the new king would only be extremely disappointed. Yes, it was a smile of expectation. He expected them to follow the path he laid out and step into the abyss, and he expected them to dig their own graves. Only in this way could the new king feel happy. However, this smile was full of malice to George, so he could not feel the smile it should have. Instead, he felt extremely gloomy. Let us go. Your Majesty, I surrender." "Me too. The Leviathan family swears allegiance to you. I'll give you anything you want. I beg you to forgive me." The situation took a turn for the worse. Seeing that the situation was not good, the nobles knelt down and begged for mercy. Although they were the majority and there were only 4 enemies, they seemed to be the ones being surrounded. It was too late. George lowered his sword weakly. The moment the nobles drew their weapons from their waists, they had already become the rebels in Roland's words. The emotions of unwillingness, grievance, fear, and anger alternated, but in the end, they were reduced to nothingness by a long sword. Chapter 870. It was a wonderful feeling. Edith took a deep breath and savored the smell of blood in the air. She also felt the fear spreading in everyone's heart. The encirclement was shrinking rapidly. The so-called resistance only lasted for a short time before it was broken by the unstoppable attack of the gods' punishment witches. In the eyes of these tequila survivors, the superior nobles were no different from ordinary people. As long as they had no ability, they were all ordinary people. They would not hesitate to attack. However, they weren't killing for themselves at the moment. Instead, they were being instructed by another mortal. She was also confident that under the influence of that common person, these gods' punishment witches would also follow her orders. Even if she was just a common person like the common person. This was the charm of power. Through the connection and negotiation between people, interests, goals, desires were mixed together to form a strange order. Through it, even a common person could control a power far greater than their own. Your Majesty, the screening is finished. When the last person fell, number 76, Phyllis dropped her sword, which was full of cracks, and turned to report to Roland. More than 60 corpses were lying in a mess. The blood that flowed out condensed into dark red lumps, which looked like hot wax in the light of the bonfire. All the nobles who were still alive looked pale and did not dare to make a sound, for fear that they would become the next corpse. As for the 3 waivers, they had already collapsed on the ground, trembling. If she asked the same question again, even without Nightingale, she knew how they would answer. With fear, loyalty would be guaranteed. Of course, none of the nobles who were eliminated were innocent. During the first half of the banquet, Isabella had erased all the gods' stones of retaliation they wore. With Nightingale's ability to detect lies, it was not a problem for her to say that she had read minds. Their biggest mistake was to overestimate themselves. The great nobles who ruled a territory and controlled the life and death of thousands of people were still vulnerable in the face of a higher level of power. After this war, half of the fiefs around Redwater would be swept away. In comparison, her risky scheme against the 2 big families in the city of Evernight was not worth mentioning. Fortunately, the plan had finally achieved the effect perfectly. His Majesty had given her enough trust. From the witches to the tequila survivors, every step was performed according to her arrangement. Even the 5 questions and answers were approved without changing a word. The only interlude was the glass that was thrown at the end. She did not know why His Majesty had to use the wine cup as a signal to attack. According to common sense, this step was purely superfluous. The movement of throwing the cup was difficult to be seen by all the guards at the same time, and the sound of it breaking was easy to cover up. Moreover, he had to prepare wine in advance, which was really puzzling. But from the effect of doing it, it unexpectedly added a sense of mystery to him. Together with the theory of mind reading, it made the deterrent effect go up another level. This was probably the level that only kings could comprehend. Edith suppressed her excitement and licked her lips. It was indeed the right choice to work for Roland Wimbledon. Thinking of this, she could not help but look at the king, hoping to share this happiness with him. However, she found that the anticipation on the king's face had disappeared without a trace, and there was even a vague sense of rejection and boredom in his eyes. "Is there another banquet hall in the villa?" Roland asked in a low voice. It's right next door," Earl Delta gulped. "Let everyone go there. I have something to say." He nodded. "As for these rebels, ask your men to count them and make a list for me. I want them tonight." Yes, your Majesty. And open all the doors and windows. Dispose of the bodies as soon as possible. The smell of rust is really disgusting. I'll send someone to do it right now." The Pearl of the Northern Regions suddenly realized that His Majesty was not looking forward to this killing. He was looking forward to the departure of these nobles and leaving a Redwater city under the control of City Hall. For bystanders, the deterrent effect of escorting the mine was obviously not as effective as a pile of corpses. But as far as killing itself was concerned, he did not like it very much. Even the smell of blood in the hall made him feel disgusted. The joy she felt earlier immediately dissipated a lot. After realizing this, Edith hesitated a little. Wasn't the plan he had laid out a little too much? Maybe it would be better to kill half of them on the spot and drag the rest out? After all, if the preference shown was too different from that of the superior, it was easy to arouse their resentment. In that case, her road to power would be much more difficult. After everyone moved to the next hall, Roland finally relaxed his knitted brows. He cleared his throat and said loudly, "Don't worry, everyone. Only the rebels will be severely punished. Now that the rebellion has been quelled, the most urgent task is to restore the order in Redwater City, and we still need your help and cooperation. Please give us your orders, Your Majesty." The nobles all knelt down and said. Roland nodded with satisfaction. "Get up. This is the first task I'll give you. After the fief is returned to the king, the original boundaries will be meaningless. I need you to gather in Redwater City, not only the mansions, but also the freedmen, serfs, and domestic animals in the fief. But, Your Majesty, if you move all the people in the surrounding area here, Redwater City will not have enough food to feed them." Earl Delta bit the bullet and said, "Even if you arrange all these people to work in the fields, there is not enough farmland nearby to cultivate. If you forcibly drive them away, I'm afraid it will cause famine and riots. First of all, this year you will plant a kind of wheat called Golden 2, which has a yield close to 10 times that of ordinary wheat. Secondly, the people who can't live in the fief can be moved to the western region. No matter how many there are, I will take them in." Gasps could be heard from the audience. 10 times? Does such wheat really exist? But our subjects. After you take back the fief, those people will naturally not be your subjects anymore. They can decide whether to stay or go. Roland interrupted. Before, the land utilization rate was too low, and the population was scattered. There were only a few thousand people in an autonomous territory of tens of thousands of acres, which was extremely inconvenient for the implementation of the policy. Therefore, it is necessary to shrink the city as the center. I know you're confused about the revolution, but it's exactly because of the reorganization that Neverwinter has become so prosperous today. It doesn't matter if you don't know how to do it. There will be people who will teach you how to benefit from the reform. Teach us? Earl Delta was stunned. That's right, a city hall official personally trained by Neverwinter. They will form a management department to replace the former lords and govern the various areas for me. You can choose to join it and gain power and status, but your income will be greatly limited. You can also find opportunities to become a part of the large-scale production. There is no upper limit to the wealth you can get, but you can't interfere with the government's orders. Instead, you have to obey it and complete every task assigned by the city hall. Roland said slowly, "Don't worry. Tomorrow, the core management system will be established. You can learn about it in detail before making a decision. But remember, no matter which direction you choose, your achievements will far exceed the value of a fief." An hour later, the nobles slowly dispersed. Roland heaved a sigh of relief. So, Redwater City is under control. Next, there are Silver City and the Old King City. But the latter has been cleaned up and only needs to be managed by simple arrangements, Edith replied. I don't know how the other road is going. He looked out of the window. At this time, the moon had already risen in the sky, and the quiet lake seemed to be glowing with a silver light. If there is no accident, Iron Axe should be able to arrive at Valencia tomorrow. Probably. Edith's heart skipped a beat. She thought of the conversation she had with Iron Axe before she set off and Roland's expression today. She suddenly felt a little uncertain. I hope everything goes well. Roland shrugged. You go back to the general staff. You have a lot of work to do tonight. According to the plan, after getting the list of rebels, the First Army would split up that night and clear out their territory as quickly as possible. This was why the army was stationed outside the city. Yes. Edith said absent-mindedly. "I'll take my leave." "By the way," Roland stopped her when she walked to the door of the hall. "What a wonderful plan. Well done." "Well done? Is that so? His Majesty doesn't mind what I've done?" At that moment, the Pearl of the Northern region felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. So that's how it is. She suddenly understood her direction on the road to power. Since His Majesty didn't want to get involved in these plans and tricks, she would be the one to carry them out. And this was exactly what she was good at. Chapter 871. Is that Valencia? Iron Axe turned the telescope and looked at the city in the distance. It was gray and brown in color. According to the map, it should be it. After all, there's only one San Juan River, so it's unlikely that we got the wrong direction, the adjutant Birpo replied. Like Iron Axe, he was a hunter from Border Town and was one of the earliest people to serve the Lord. It's a bit strange. He frowned. What's strange? Valencia is the main city of the eastern region and a major trade center of Grey Castle. The Old King's City, Eagle City, and Valencia form the prosperous central region of the kingdom. I've even heard of it when I was in the southernmost region, Iron Axe explained. Iron Axe explained, but don't you think the number of merchant ships we've encountered these days is pitifully small? I don't know. Beerpaw shrugged. Maybe the previous pirate attacks scared the merchants out of their wits and they don't dare to do business here anymore. The attack happened 2 years ago. No matter how serious the looting was, it should have recovered by now. The city wall in his sight was ugly and bloated. The brown wall seemed to have been deliberately widened. Perhaps due to the lack of stone, the new wall was made of red mud mixed with a lot of gravel and wood. It looked like the rubble wall in the early days of Border Town. In addition, the surface of the wall was covered with a layer of shiny stuff, which Iron Axe could not see clearly because of the distance. The new and old walls were stacked together, which doubled the width of the top of the wall. However, this transformation was not very thorough. Some parts of the wall were still the same. From a distance, it looked rough and bumpy. It did not look like a city famous for its richness at all. Who cares, as long as we take it down? Beerpaw took out a fire lantern fruit from his bosom and threw it into his mouth. Even if it's not Valencia, but Valencia or Valencia, so what? His Majesty's order is to wipe out the entire eastern region, right? It's very simple. We just need to attack every city we see. Iron Axe shook his head helplessly. This guy was still the same as before. He rarely thought for more than 3 breaths, and the most common thing he did when he encountered a target was to rush at it with a javelin. While the other hunters were still laying traps and releasing their hounds to track their prey, he had already returned with the fruits of his hunt. It was said that even the most terrifying black bear in the forest was not willing to provoke him too much. That was how he got his nickname, Bear Paw. If he had been willing to use his brain, he would not still be an adjutant. Even Vanner had become the commander-in-chief of the artillery battalion. But the process of the battle isn't the point. The point is how to deal with the aftermath. But Beerpaw's next words slightly surprised Iron Axe. If we make a mess of the eastern region, City Hall will definitely make trouble for us. But if we don't make a big move, those officials won't even be able to stand firm. Did His Majesty tell us what to do? No, he only told me to handle it according to the situation. That would be a headache. Of course, you're the boss, so I'll leave this matter to you. I'll just do as you say. Bearpaw grinned. Iron Axe's interest was piqued. Where is your headache? Do you really not know, or are you testing me? Bearpaw put his hand on his forehead. Of course it's about how to deal with those nobles. The eastern region has persisted for so long without a turning point. His Majesty's power is getting stronger and stronger, so there will definitely be more than one voice in the inner circle. When we conquer the city, most of them will surrender, and then trouble will come. Without Lady Nightingale, how are you going to distinguish them? Go on. Iron Axe nodded. It seemed that Bearpaw was not completely brainless. Hey, don't tell me you really didn't consider it? Bearpaw's eyes widened. The Eastern Front Army doesn't have many people, so the number of troops that can stay here is very limited. At most, they can only guard the inner city, but this is Timothy's headquarters. If those nobles surrender and are willing to cooperate with us, it'll be fine. But what if they have evil intentions and always want to seize power? Even if there were only a small group of such people, they could make the eastern region restless. After the army left, the city hall would be useless. If the situation was serious, the officials sent by the city hall might not survive. Poisoning, assassination, bribery. These methods can't be defended by guns. Then what do you think? Iron Axe asked curiously. Boss, it's your business. Bear Paw rolled his eyes and spat the chewed fruit seeds into the rolling river. Just hypothetically, for example, you're the commander-in-chief of the Eastern Front Army. Just say it casually. Well. Bear Paw thought for a while and then sighed. There's no good way. If Lady Nightingale can't come, we can only rely on time to distinguish them. Or we can bribe more rats and take precautions. Then we can use the method of Neverwinter to establish a police force to maintain order. We can use as few people as possible from the surrendered nobles until the end of the war. Sure enough. Iron Axe whispered. No, nothing. He put away the telescope. There's nothing for you to do here. Go and inform the people on the other ships to prepare for landing. We're approaching the suburban dock. Got it. At the mention of the war, Bear Paw immediately became spirited. After floating on the river for so long, I can finally fight. Looking at the adjutant's back, Iron Axe exhaled and leaned over the porthole of the command room, deep in thought. He could not help but think of the conversation Edith had with him the day before the army set off. The meeting place was in a private room of Evelyn's tavern, which did not look like a place to talk business. Iron Axe had thought that Edith intended to congratulate the success of the operation as an official of the Ministry of Defense and to get familiar with the army. He did not expect that there was only the Pearl of the Northern region in the private room, and what she said was shocking enough. The content of their conversation happened to be the headache that Bear Paw had been nagging about. To this day, he clearly remembered every single word that the other party had said. Why do you think His Majesty put you in charge of the Eastern Front Army? Edith's opening remarks surprised him. I only follow orders and don't ask why. But orders don't explain every detail, especially when it's inconvenient to mention something, the Pearl of the Northern region said methodically while sipping her chaos drink. You think it's because you're the only one who can take charge. But is that really the case? You should know better than me how strong the people in the Eastern region are. Any regular army of 500 or 600 people can easily defeat them. In other words, a commander at the level of a battalion commander is enough to deal with the war on the Eastern Front. On the contrary, the Western Front Army has to deal with the holy city of Hermes, which is not only complicated but also much more dangerous. If there's no special reason, it's more appropriate for you to help His Majesty command the Western Front Army and hand over the Eastern Front Army to someone else. Iron Axe did not answer at that time, but he faintly agreed with Edith. As for this special reason, it's actually very simple. It's your attitude towards the nobles. Edith continued, as a Majin Sandman, you won't have any inexplicable fear or tolerance for the nobles of Grey Castle. The key to recovering the Eastern region is how to deal with the rebellious nobles. Her analysis was roughly the same as what Bearpaw had said, but much more detailed. Iron Axe could not help but believe that it was impossible to stabilize the Eastern region by ordinary means. His Majesty needed people and resources, and he didn't have time to waste on a bunch of scums. The only problem was, His Majesty didn't say so. Of course not. His Majesty is a merciful God, so there are some things that only we can do, Edith said slowly. But he didn't give us no hints. For this operation, the City Hall sent a total of 265 people to accompany the army. They're all managers that His Majesty has painstakingly trained to take over the land that needs to be recovered. The Eastern Front Army accounted for more than 2/3 of the total. You should understand the reason. Iron Axe still remembered that moment. It was like a bolt of lightning flashed across his heart. Don't let His Majesty down, Edith said at last. Sir, the First Army is ready to land. The fleet can dock at any time. Suddenly, a subordinate's report interrupted his thoughts. Chapter 872. The sound of a brass trumpet came from afar, breaking the peace of noon. The birds in the courtyard stopped chirping as if they had sensed something. For a moment, the castle hall seemed solemn and depressing. Duke Willenborg knew it was time for the decisive battle. He moved his eyes away from the mural of King Timothy and turned to look at an exquisite full-body armor. It was the armor passed down from his grandfather. After many repairs and polishing, every piece of the armor was soaked in oil and could almost be regarded as another layer of skin. A line of small words was engraved on the right arm guard, which was the family's admonition, "Be loyal and remember." He wore this armor and captured the rebellious old duke in a chaotic battle against a rain of arrows. He was then conferred the title of the new guardian of the eastern region by His Majesty. Although Timothy had fallen, his duty as a guardian would not be interrupted. He would never let down this honor. "Your Excellency, Prince Roland's troops are approaching Valencia. There are no traces of large firearms in the troops." A subordinate walked into the hall and reported to him. "Very well." Willian nodded. "Inform the others to be in position. I'll be there immediately." "Yes, Your Excellency." He then took off his coat and walked to the armor. He said to his chief knight, Galena, "Put on the armor for me." "Yes, Your Excellency." The woman rolled up her sleeves and began to undress him. Her calloused and rough hands were now as soft as water, gently taking off his coat and undershirt. It was hard to imagine that Galena had also used these hands to hold a spear and pierce through the enemy's armor and shield in battle. He was intoxicated by this scene whenever he saw it. "Do you regret it?" "Of course not, Your Excellency," Galena replied calmly. "When you decided to appoint a woman as your chief knight, I decided to follow you forever. No matter what happens, I'll do my duty. But this time, the enemy is stronger than before." If it's possible, the Duke was interrupted by the sudden tightening of his belt. "Since you know the enemy is strong, why did you refuse the covenant of the King of Dawn? It's fine if you don't agree, but you even chased the messenger out of Valencia in public. If the other side finds out, they will definitely blame you for not knowing what's good for you. Tisk, let's not talk about whether the help of the city of Glow can resist the army of Prince Roland. It's already too much to ask me to provide a harbor for his troops." Juan twitched his mouth. "His Majesty granted me the eastern region. What's the difference between giving it to Appin Moya and Roland Wimbledon? If I were to agree, it would be tantamount to betraying His Majesty's trust." "Then my answer is the same," Gryna said without hesitation. "Loyalty is not a quality unique to the Borg family." "Sir, please don't mention those words again, or it will be no different from an insult to me." Juan was silent for a long while before he said, "Unfortunately, most of the nobles have forgotten this." "I understand. Come with me. Although the opponent is strong, I will not let them take Valencia easily. I have been waiting for this battle for a long time." "Yes, my lady." The female knight chuckled. "Bale." He shouted the name of the clerk. "Come to me." Soon, a bald middle-aged man came into the hall. "My lady, what can I do for you?" Remember, after a night's rest, the minions of the Kingslayer Roland Wimbledon officially launch an attack on Valencia today. Willenborg, the guardian of the eastern region, the Duke of Valencia, in the name of the late king, is determined to stop the enemy here. His chief knight, Gryna Veen, is also with him. Their courage and loyalty are beyond doubt. May God bless them. Lion paused. "Of course, if you think this account is a little subjective, you can omit the last sentence." Bale nodded and quickly wrote down the Lord's statement on a notebook with a charcoal pen he carried with him. "I think there's no harm in adding it, my lady. There is no absolutely objective record in this world. I'm the clerk of Valencia, so it's not surprising that I'm a little biased. In other words, this is part of objectivity. Then keep it. But no matter what the result is, you have to record it truthfully. Do you understand?" Willian emphasized. "It's your mission to record the cause and process of this incident in its entirety. "Please rest assured, my lady." The clerk bowed. "I'll make sure the world remembers this period of history." Willan did not say anything else. He picked up the steel sword hanging on the wall and walked out of the castle without looking back. The two climbed up the watchtower on the city wall. The bonfire was already lit. Grease was boiling in the pot, giving off a pungent smell. The household soldiers were busy moving up and down the wall, moving stones and rolling logs onto the battlements. According to the experience of the battle in King's City, Roland's most threatening means of siege was a kind of snow powder weapon called artillery. Its range was far greater than that of a catapult. Until the fall of the city, His Majesty had not been able to produce a similar product. On the day when King's City was breached, Timothy entrusted his confidant with the formula of snow powder, the principle of the weapon, and the manufacturing method to Willan. His purpose was self-evident. After the Duke took over the project, he invested a lot of energy and money into it. He also found some ways to limit its power. For example, the artillery itself was very heavy and needed to rely on flat terrain to exert its power. In addition, the erection process was very slow and required the protection of flintlocks. In other words, it was more suitable for defense than offense. In order to face the war that would come sooner or later, Willan was fully prepared. In addition to widening the city wall and installing barbs, he also sent people to dig up all the roads in the suburbs and fill the farmland with river water, turning it into a swamp. He also set up many hidden stakes in the San Juan River, making it difficult for large inland river ships with more than a mast to pass through. 2 years of preparation had completely changed the surrounding environment. Now, not to mention carriages and horses, even carrying heavy objects on foot was quite difficult. Although the cost was quite heavy, the road was cut off, which caused the prosperity of the city of commerce to cease to exist, and the shrinking of the farmland had caused a significant drop in the population. The benefits were also obvious. At least, he did not see a single artillery in the slowly approaching enemy troops. Obviously, the enemy had also realized that if they did not first build a road, it would be almost impossible to drag the artillery to the city wall. Undoubtedly, the next battle was going to be a tough one. The enemy's flintlocks were extremely fast, but there was no shelter under the city wall, and with the barbs on the wall, it was not easy to climb up. On the contrary, he had set up 4 catapults and 2 large artillery in the city, especially the latter, which could attack the enemy within 1,000 steps. Under such circumstances, the outcome of the battle was still uncertain. "They're coming," Galena warned. As she spoke, a group of soldiers in brown clothes stepped out of the formation and surrounded the city gate. They did not move fast, but their footsteps were extraordinarily firm. Very quickly, this group of people lost their orderly formation due to the muddy ground. They scattered in 2s and 3s, like old farmers who were immersed in farming. In addition to the grayish-black spears on their backs, they also carried a thigh-thick barrel, but judging from the weight, it was definitely not a kind of artillery. Willan estimated the distance, raised the red flag and waved it down. Chapter 873. Thick black smoke immediately rose from both ends of the city. 2 loud noises, one from the front and one from the back, caused the ground of the watchtower to tremble slightly. After the explosions, cheers came from below the city wall. Apparently, it was a great boost to morale to strike before the enemy. But Willan knew that the first round of shooting was just that. Sure enough, after a few breaths, 2 clumps of mud rose in the field. Not only did they not hit the enemy, but they also missed the target. The shell bounced up after hitting the ground and rolled forward for a short distance, plowing a shallow trench about 3 feet long in the muddy battlefield. Today was not a windless day, which meant that the boulder cannon needed more tests to hit the target. He knew very well that the cannon built by Valencia was far inferior to the long-barreled cannon used by Roland, even more so than flintlocks. The most obvious difference was that the boulder cannon could not move freely. To prevent the cannon from exploding, the craftsmen melted almost all the bronze utensils in the city, including the ancient clock on the clock tower. After many experiments, the finished product was strong enough to crush any carriage. The bore was about an arm thick and could only be set up on a specially built turret. The pitch and orientation were controlled by a noose, and it took at least a quarter of an hour to reload after each shot. In addition, the ball-shaped shell was polished granite, which could not cause a violent explosion like the one Roland used to bombard King City. Willon had also tried to use hollow shells that could be wrapped in snow powder, but they were extremely unstable and the production rate was very low because of the iron shell. He had never understood where Roland had gotten so many materials. Therefore, from the beginning, the Duke's defensive strategy was to limit the enemy's cannon as much as possible. As long as the enemy was forced to come close to the city wall, his boulder cannon would eventually hit the enemy. After a round of shooting, Roland's army unexpectedly stopped advancing. It seemed that they were shocked by this unexpected attack and began to retreat. They only stopped when they were about 100 steps away from the landing point of the cannonball. "What are they doing?" Galena asked in confusion. One looked up and saw that the 100 or so men had shed their gear and were digging. At first glance, it looked as if they were trying to clear a patch of ground in the field. "He's probably scared and wants to adjust his team to fight a protracted battle," said a viscount who was also watching the battle from the watchtower. "I heard that Roland Wimbledon has completely abandoned the knight. The army is made up of a bunch of country bumpkins who haven't seen much. They won all the way with high-quality firearms and basically didn't encounter any setbacks. Now that they have to withstand our attacks and take over the city walls, they must be hesitating. That move, earth to mud, was done beautifully, my lord. But our income and squires have also decreased a lot," another man said with a frown. "Many of our subjects escaped during the months of demons this year, and half of our workshops have been abandoned. If possible, we'd better negotiate with Roland Wimbledon. Without equal conditions, there's no basis for negotiation. We have to win the next battle first." "Shut up, all of you," Willon said unhappily. "I will never surrender to the Kingslayer. If you would rather abandon your noble status and betray His Majesty Timothy, I'll throw you into the cellar first and let you accompany the rioters." The crowd suddenly fell silent. In order to prepare for this defensive battle, Valencia had indeed paid a great price. Not only had it changed from a commercial center to a stronghold, but he had also made some helpless moves that he had initially been unwilling to do. But in the eyes of the Duke, it was all worth it. If Prince Roland had tried to rope in the nobles to control the kingdom of Grey Castle from the very beginning, he would have failed long ago. However, Roland had chosen a rebellious path, which was to overthrow the entire aristocratic system and take all the power for himself. As long as he could thwart Roland's attack here, the others would change their minds and support him to continue to rule the eastern region, and more opponents would emerge in Grey Castle. It could be said that he was fighting for His Majesty Timothy against Roland, and also to defend the traditional noble system. "My lord, the boulder cannons have been loaded," an attendant reported. "Shall we continue shooting?" Galena asked. "No, wait a little longer. Unless we add snow powder, it'll be difficult for us to hit that position." One shook his head. He somewhat regretted giving the order so soon. He had thought that the earlier they fired, the earlier they could complete the calibration, but he did not expect that they would stop moving forward after one shot. Now, watching the group of people busily working in the mud, he felt a faint sense of unease. The shoveled flat ground was only big enough for 2 people to stand on. It did not look like they were preparing for setting up camp. More than 100 people were divided into more than 10 groups, and after clearing the ground, they began to fiddle with the long green tubes. Through the telescope, Howren could see their movements clearly. The long tube seemed to be just one of the components. There was a tripod at the bottom, and there was a concave iron plate at the end. There were also several strange sticks stuck into the tube. These things had been carried on the backs of the people, and it took them less than a quarter of an hour to put them together, which showed the ingenuity of the design. However, the next moment, the Duke could hardly believe his eyes. He saw them put a spindle-shaped jar into the tube, and then a puff of white smoke quickly sprayed out from the top of the tube. While the nobles were still wondering what it was, more than 10 dark red fireballs suddenly burst inside and outside the city wall, followed by a series of thunderous explosions. Since the houses near the inner side of the city wall had been demolished, leaving only a variety of traps and obstacles, There were not many casualties, but Willon was shocked beyond words. At that moment, there was only one voice left in his head. Is that a cannon? But how could it be a cannon? Although the Duke had not seen Roland's artillery with his own eyes, he had heard of it many times. They were divided into two types according to the length of the barrel. The former could be mounted on a four-wheeled carriage, while the latter had to be transported by ship. Either way, it was not something that could be carried by human hands. It took all the craftsmen and materials in Valencia 2 years to forge these two barely usable cannons. This was due to the lack of skill and experience, but in principle, it was no different from Roland's firearms. He believed that if the craftsmen were given a few more years, they would definitely be able to make similar weapons. But the scene before him completely overturned his thinking. How could such a thin tube withstand the huge pressure produced by the explosion of snow powder? This was not logical at all. Take out the stone bullets and add half a bag of snow powder. The Duke turned to his attendant and shouted, "Fire immediately after loading it. As long as you hit one person, I'll reward him with 10 golden dragon coins." The attendant hesitated and said, "Half a bag? My lord, that may damage the cannon. If we let them attack the city wall like this, the stone cannons will be useless." One grabbed the attendant's collar and said, "Do as I say." Just as he gave the order, white smoke rose again in front of the position. The interval between the two was less than 10 breaths. This time, Willon heard a slight buzzing sound, which sounded like the chirping of a bird or the whistle of an arrow piercing through the air. Whoosh! Chapter 874. In the end, the stone cannons did not fire a second shot. To make it easier for the operators to observe the enemy and the landing point, the Duke had built 6 high platforms in the city for the cannons and catapults. In other words, the height of the towers was higher than the city walls, and any movement of the enemy could not escape the eyes of the attackers. This was supposed to be a foolproof choice. The high vantage point could not only improve the shooting efficiency, increase the range of the cannons and catapults, but also put a strong sense of pressure on the enemy. But in the face of the incredible cannons of Roland's army, the high platforms became eye-catching targets. For the first time, Willon felt that a quarter of an hour was so long. The explosions on the city walls seemed to have never stopped. Just as the family soldiers were working hard to load snow powder, a cannonball landed on the high platform on the right. In an instant, it was as if a bright sun had risen on the platform, engulfing the huge stone cannon and more than 20 people. Then, the bright red flames turned into countless tentacles, rushing in all directions. The buildings in the city also shook violently, raising a cloud of yellow dust. A broken bronze pipe flew out of the flames and hit the side of another platform before falling straight to the ground. It fell into a group of people who were moving stones. The body of flesh showed its fragility and powerlessness at this moment. When the barrel rolled twice and stopped, there was already a pile of red and brown meat on the ground. And those unlucky people whose hands and feet were crushed, but who were still breathing, held their broken limbs and screamed, hoping that someone would give them a quick death. But Willon had no time to care about them. The watchtower was also an obvious target for the enemy. As soon as the top of the wall turned into a sea of fire, the nobles lost the courage to continue watching and immediately retreated. And this decision was obviously the right one. The speed of the enemy's cannons was far faster than they had imagined. Almost every 10 breaths, a round of cannonballs would hit the ground, and the accuracy was getting higher and higher. The area around the city walls had become an extremely dangerous area. At first, there were fireballs rising outside the city, but then they all hit the city and moved toward the high platforms and the city gate. Smoke billowed in the city, debris flew everywhere, and the roars and howls mixed together, like a scene from hell. When the enemy finally stopped shooting, not only were the 6 platforms destroyed, but the city gate had also been blasted open. According to the plan, the Duke's soldiers should immediately put down iron fences or dragon-breaking stones to block the way into the city. At the same time, they should be ready to block the attack. However, after experiencing such a terrible bombardment, it was impractical for them to continue to hold their posts. Flames flowed along the grease, and charred corpses could be seen all over the city walls. Even if some people were lucky enough to escape, they had completely lost the courage to fight, not to mention those who had been forcibly recruited. Those who could run had already run away. Those who were left were either scared out of their wits or were seriously injured and had no strength to run anymore. Willan had expected to lose, but he had not expected it to happen so quickly. They hadn't even injured a single one of their opponents, yet their defensive line had already collapsed. In these 2 years, what had Roland done? "Sir, we can't fight anymore, let's just surrender." That's right. Surrendering doesn't mean admitting defeat. We can always find another opportunity. You're right. As long as they stay in the eastern region, they'll get their revenge sooner or later. If His Majesty Timothy were here, he wouldn't blame you. You've done your best. You can only blame the enemy for being too cruel. After a moment of silence, Willan turned to look at Gryna. Gryna had pushed away a burning wooden beam to protect him when she retreated. The scattered charcoal had burned off a corner of her hair and left 2 black marks on her face. Even so, her eyes were still as bright as before, without a trace of frustration or embarrassment. "I'll listen to you." The Duke took a deep breath and said, "You surrender." "Sir, what about you? I didn't prepare for 2 years just to leave a reputation of surrendering without a fight," he said slowly. "I have to make Roland understand that powerful force can't conquer everything. His Majesty Timothy also has fearless vassals. Gryna, where's my knight regiment?" Chief Knight said without hesitation, "They're all on standby in the second ambush zone. No need to hide. Let them all come to the city gate," Willan ordered. "Viscount Audiobook, withdraw all the traps we've prepared." "Withdraw?" the nobles asked in surprise. "Those traps alone can't stop the enemy. It's better to let them in and have a head-on charge. At this point, someone has to give us an explanation." The Duke found himself surprisingly calm at the last moment. No matter what, this scene would be recorded in the history books, and he would have a clear conscience about His Majesty. An hour later, Roland's army finally appeared at the city gate. They moved very cautiously. First, a small team dismantled the broken door planks and occupied both entrances and exits. Then the rest of the troops followed. Stepping into the city, they quickly piled up a simple camp in the middle of the long street and pushed 2 strange flintlocks to the front. Willan did not care what they were going to do. He raised the reins and slowly led the knight regiment out from the corner of the street and lined up along the street. The 7 knight regiment and 15 squires were his last counterattack force. This also convinced the Duke of the necessity and superiority of the aristocratic system. In the face of such a desperate situation, only the nobles who understood loyalty, honor, and duty could still muster up the courage to charge at the enemy. He pulled down his helmet and set up his spear. Facing the increasing number of invaders, he let out a long sigh. "Although we've failed today, history will not forget us. Everyone's name will become a poem and be sung in songs. Muster up the courage and fight fearlessly to the last moment. Knight of the Borg family, charge with me." "Victory!" Willan waved the reins and led his men to speed up along the long street, charging at the enemy's position. The billowing smoke and the unextinguished flames were the best embellishments on the battlefield. For a moment, the Duke felt that this was the right place for him. Soon, the charging distance was shortened by half and the horses' speed increased to the maximum. However, he did not hear the drumming of hooves behind him. Turning around, one could not help but be stunned. He was surprised to find that the more than 20 people who had charged at the beginning had disappeared. Only Galeno was still by his side. There was more than one road on this street. It was connected to many forks and alleys. At that moment, one understood the cause and effect. How did this happen? He wanted to ask, but when he saw the female knight regiment's affectionate eyes, he suddenly felt that everything was not important anymore. "This ending is not bad. At least I have you by my side, don't you?" Willan smiled. He lowered his spear and aimed at the nearest enemy. Chapter 875. When Iron Axe walked into the messy Valencia, he was surprised by the destructive effect of the new firearm, although he was expressionless. Although he had participated in the testing of this weapon, which was called a mortar by His Majesty, he knew that putting it into practice and testing it were two different things. Each team consisted of 5 people, and each of them carried 2 shells. It was truly shocking that they were able to fire such a powerful shot without the support of backup ammunition. He knew that the rate of fire of the mortar was much higher than that of the field cannons, and he had imagined the scene of dozens of teams firing at the same time. However, when he saw it for the first time, he found that he still underestimated this firearm. The mortar was not as powerful as the Longsong cannons, but it was light and easy to use. It could move with the army without the help of witches, and it could also cross the city wall to attack the target hiding behind it. When there was enough ammunition, the attack on the enemy was almost destructive. If it were the First Army, he was not sure that they could withstand such a firepower attack. No. It was normal that they could not withstand it. In the face of the overwhelming fire rain, it was good enough that they did not collapse on the spot. Iron Axe finally understood why His Majesty had confidently thrown all the seemingly sophisticated field cannons back to the furnace area. In front of the mortars, there was indeed no need to equip the solid core projectiles that they had previously used. But then again, in the whole Grey Castle, only His Majesty could afford such a firearm. It was said that the cost of a shell was about 3 or 4 golden dragon, which meant that more than 300 shells had been fired in an instant. And the shell used in the Longsong cannons was several times more expensive. If they fought against the demons in the future, could the golden dragon stored in the warehouse really last Neverwinter until the end of the Battle of Divine Will? Fortunately, he was not the one worrying about this problem. Let Bearav worry about it. After all, the army only had one mission, and that was to win. Iron Axe and his men walked through the long street filled with the smell of gunpowder and came to the center of the city square. This place had been surrounded by the First Army, and all the surviving nobles had been brought here to be punished after they surrendered. He glanced at the disheveled crowd. Before he could speak, a noble stood up. "I'm Count Kazan, the Lord of the Bay of Ships. May I ask where His Majesty is?" There were many rivers around Valencia, and most of its territories were named after bays or beaches. Iron Axe vaguely remembered that Ship Bay was a large fief sandwiched between Valencia and Seawinshire. An aristocratic family that could occupy such a territory must have enjoyed the respect and fear of its subjects. But at a time like this, the other party's deliberately raised chin and pretended politeness seemed a little ridiculous. His Majesty doesn't have time to take care of the affairs of the eastern region. I'm in charge here. You? Count Kazan furrowed his brows. Is this guy joking? He doesn't look like someone from Grey Castle, does he? Will Roland Wimbledon allow a Sand Nation to manage the army? How could I not attend such an important expedition personally? Isn't he afraid that the army will scatter? Not only the Lord of the Bay of Ships, but also the crowd was skeptical. The Commander-in-Chief of the Eastern Front Army is indeed Sir Iron Axe. We can all testify to that. The adjutant Bearpaw could not help but shout. Eastern Front Army? What's that? Kazan asked. The army that will recover the eastern region, of course. Bearpaw. Iron Axe sharply interrupted the adjutant. The latter also realized that he had made a slip of the tongue and hurriedly covered his mouth with his hand. Miss Edith was right. Even though His Majesty had decided to withdraw the feudal power and completely overthrow the traditional nobles, these people still had influence. Bearpaw, who was born in a family of hunters, obviously cared about the title even though he was not servile in front of them. Otherwise, he would not have made such a low-level mistake. Only he could do that. Thinking of this, Iron Axe said in a low voice, "Whether you believe it or not, the facts will not change. And why are you the one asking questions? Where's the Duke of Valencia? Isn't he the ruler of the eastern region?" His Excellency the Duke died in the battle. Kazan shook his head and showed a sad expression. He insisted on leading the Knight Regiment to launch a frontal assault. We couldn't stop him. So the man who was shot into a sieve on the horse was the Duke? Iron Axe raised his eyebrows. As a soldier, he was qualified. But my soldiers reported that there were only 2 attackers. Where's the so-called Knight Regiment? He looked at the nobles in the crowd who had not yet taken off their armors. Is it possible that the dignified guardian of the eastern region only has one knight under his command? This. Kazan was speechless for a moment. Don't mention that nonsense. Since you're the person in charge of the army, we'll tell you our request directly. Another noble stepped out and said, "We can surrender and let everyone work for Roland Wimbledon, but he must meet us. If His Majesty doesn't have time to come to the eastern region, we can also send an envoy." "For you, Viscount Audiobook," the other said impatiently. "Before that, we hope to be treated in accordance with our status. If you need ransom or compensation for our crimes, just tell us the amount." "But you're guilty of treason," Iron Axe said expressionlessly. "Even a noble can't let you escape trial. First of all, the conspirator is Duke Willon Borg, and he has paid the price. We're only staying here because we have no choice. According to the law, we should be punished. Yes, we're not his vassals. We're just under his jurisdiction." At this time, Kazan also came to his senses. Secondly, no matter what the sentence is, it's up to His Majesty. Do you want to put us on trial? Iron Axe quickly understood why these nobles were still putting on airs even though they were obviously defeated. When they found that Roland Wimbledon did not come in person with his army, they lost interest in talking. Obviously, according to common sense, how to deal with the defeated could only be known after the king met them. What followed was not so much a trial, but an exchange of interests. Those who could not pay up would be eliminated, while those who could reach an agreement could keep their place. Generally speaking, this was the case. It was not the first time they had faced such a defeat, and they believed that they could offer something that would impress the king. Unfortunately, the king he was loyal to was not a noble in the ordinary sense. Iron Axe shrugged. "I don't have the power to do that, but at the same time, before His Majesty makes a decision, you're still conspirators. So I can only put you in the dungeon until His Majesty is willing to see you." "How long will that take?" the Earl of Bay said discontentedly. "And as I said before, according to the kingdom's law, we can't be counted as treason unless you can find conclusive evidence. According to the messenger's speed, at most a month." Iron Axe gave a rare smile and directly ignored the second half of the Earl's sentence. "Please rest assured, I'll provide your daily necessities and food according to the standards of the nobles." Late at night 2 days later, Beerpole rushed into Iron Axe's tent in a panic. Chapter 876. Although there were wells and water facilities around the castle, the fire broke out very fiercely. Thick smoke spewed up the stairs, making it difficult for the rescuers to get close to the hall on the first floor. The First Army quickly withdrew from the castle and sealed off the area. The fire burned for more than 4 hours, and they could not enter the dungeon until the next afternoon. By then, there was nothing left in the dungeon. After that, it was time to clean up and investigate the scene. The officers who came with the army set up a temporary city hall and began to take over the administration of Valencia. The dungeon fire soon came to an end. A group of rats, who hated Duke Borg, who had turned the prosperous city into a poor stronghold, sneaked into the castle through a secret passage and set the piles of wheat straw in the dungeon on fire. Therefore, this was a very vicious case of arson, which not only posed a major threat to the order of the eastern region, but also provoked the First Army of Neverwinter. In addition to vigorously publicizing the results of the investigation, the First Army and City Hall also launched a citywide campaign to wipe out the rats. Leniency for those who confess, severity for those who resist, rewards for those who report, and distribution of food. In addition, the stored food found in the mansions of various nobles was put into the market and relief, and the lifeless city suddenly became noisy. On the night when the order to kill the rats was issued, Bear's Paw once again went into Iron Axe's tent. "Boss, those big families are showing signs of leaving. Today, more than a dozen carriages passed through the West City Gate, and it seems that they are going to Seawinshire. Some of them have deep ruts, and I think they are carrying gold, silver, and jewelry." Iron Axe put down the quill in his hand. "But I said at the beginning that I only want food. Let them take the rest." The commander-in-chief was not surprised by this situation. When the fire broke out, the trust between the First Army and the traditional nobles completely collapsed. No matter for what reason, escaping from here was the only way they could think of to survive. Losing the backbone of the family and several knights was not an unbearable loss for an aristocratic family. The title could be inherited, and the knight could be conferred again, but they would not have the courage to face the enemy. Instead of staying here and waiting for death, it was better to take his family, servants, and all his wealth to somewhere else and look for new opportunities. Fiefdoms were important, but compared to his life, the latter was still a little more difficult to give up. Moreover, in order to prepare for this war, Williamborg had concentrated all his resources in Valencia. Most of the nearby territories were severely abandoned, and it would take at least 2 or 3 years for them to recover. Otherwise, they would not have made up their minds so quickly. Boss, there's one more thing. Beerpaw paused halfway through his sentence. For the simple-minded adjutant, this was a rare expression. Speak, Iron Axe said sternly. The fire in the dungeon was set by you? Beerpaw hesitated for a while before finally asking in a low voice. Why do you say that? Let's not talk about the fact that there's an iron door in the secret passage that's hard to break through with just the strength of a few rats. I don't think the troops stationed there are so lax that they didn't notice that someone was arson. Besides, I also went to the dungeon to check. The fire didn't seem to come from the room, but spread from the corridor to both sides. And according to the burnt remains, it should be caused by oil. Iron Axe nodded and said, You're right. I gave the order. Beerpaw probably did not expect Iron Axe to admit it so readily. He was stunned for a while and asked, But this kind of thing can be done by me. It's easier to make mistakes if you know. That's not what I'm asking. The adjutant shook his head. What I mean is, didn't they surrender? I see. Iron Axe pondered for a moment. In short, I didn't have time to screen whether they were really willing to surrender or not. His Majesty also didn't have time to judge them. That's why His Majesty gave me full responsibility for all the affairs of the Eastern Front before the army set off. But, do you think that making such a decision without a trial will lead to the death of innocent people? Iron Axe interrupted the adjutant and handed him a booklet on the table. Take a look at this. This is a population statistics book? I found it in the study in the castle. The commander-in-chief nodded. 5 years ago, Valencia and its surrounding areas had a population of about 220,000, which was enough to be called the most prosperous area in the eastern region. But this year, the population has plummeted to about 60,000. We've accepted about 30,000 to 40,000 refugees from the eastern region. Even if we count it as 40,000, there's still a gap of nearly 120,000 people, and this is based on the assumption that the population does not increase. You should be very clear about the cause of all this. Beerpaw gasped and said, the farmland that was flooded. And this Valencia that has changed beyond recognition. Iron Axe stood up and walked to the candlestick with his hands clasped behind his back. In order to block the road and thicken the city wall, Wilhan obviously conscripted all the nearby subjects. Without the permission and assistance of other lords, he couldn't have done this alone. The large population concentration has led to the disruption of trade and the decrease of farmland, and the final result is the number in the statistics book. In other words, these nobles are all accomplices of the Duke. Do you still think His Majesty will accept their service? Beerpaw was speechless for a moment. But what they said about their innocence is not a lie, Iron Axe continued, because in their eyes, it's nothing. Even though the farmland has shrunk by more than half, the nobles' mansions are still full of food and even people. After all, if stored properly, meat can be preserved longer than wheat. Beerpaw's pupils suddenly contracted. Of course, the most important thing is that they've seriously hindered His Majesty's plan. The population is His Majesty's most valued resource, but they've been squandering it unscrupulously. If we hadn't brought new firearms with us, what would the situation have been like? The field cannons wouldn't have been able to move an inch in the mud, and we could only attack the city by force or fight a protracted war. At that point, I think the nobles won't surrender until the population in the city is exhausted. Iron Axe turned around and asked, "Do you have any other questions?" After a long while, Beerpaw looked up and said, "You did the right thing. Burning these guys to death is too easy for them. But this solution is not His Majesty's idea, is it? What if he finds out?" Chapter 877. Changed his surname? What's going on? Roland frowned. He probably feels that he can't do anything alone, so it's more convenient to merge with another family. William seemed a little surprised that he cared so much about an inconspicuous little noble. If he wants to maintain a decent life, he needs to spend a lot of money. If he doesn't manage it well, the territory will be a burden. Is it possible that he was forced to do it? For example, to seize territory or something. That's unlikely, Roland muttered. I've seen them several times at some previous banquets, but I didn't talk to them in detail. That Galen, who changed his surname, got along well with Somi's family. It doesn't look like he was forced to do it. If you want to know more, I can ask Viscount Somi to come here right now. There's no need, Roland interrupted Nightingale's words through her whisper. I'm just asking casually, it's nothing important. But it seems that the member of Galen's family didn't come this time. If her brother Hyde had come, Nightingale would have recognized him. The banquet was invited according to the usual rules. It's my fault, the old castellan said apologetically with his hand on his chest. The meaning of his words was obvious. Although Hyde had changed his surname and became a branch of the Somi family, he was still not invited to the banquet. Silver City's developed mining industry had driven commerce, which made it similar to the city of Glow. Wealth and power were more important than titles and titles. However, it also showed that the Galen family had almost been forgotten. After Nightingale left, Hyde had inherited his father's title of Viscount. It was really sad for him to be in such a situation. When Roland returned to the camp and drew the tent curtain, Nightingale took the initiative to explain. Your Majesty, I'm not concerned about Hyde. Since I left Silver City, I've had nothing to do with the Galen family. Please believe me, I was just a little surprised. Seeing Nightingale's expression of, "It's not what you think," Roland couldn't help but want to tease her, but thinking of Nightingale's temperament, if she took his words seriously and insisted on making a stand, it would be his turn to have a headache. Therefore, he coughed twice and nodded lightly. I know. You've never lied to me about this. You didn't believe me. No, you didn't completely believe me. Nightingale immediately pointed out. Oh no, I thought I was joking, but her ability detected it. Roland had to take a deep breath and get rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind. Then he looked into her eyes and said seriously, I believe you. This time, it was Nightingale's turn to feel uncomfortable. She blushed and unconsciously looked away. I'm really just surprised. It has nothing to do with the person who betrayed me. Although Roland wanted to say that it was normal for him to care about it, it was better for him to play along with her. What are you surprised about? The Somis used to have a good relationship with my father. Nightingale said in a low voice. After my father passed away, they came to visit me in Old Guyland's mansion. But when he found out I was a witch, Old Guyland forbade me from seeing them again. I didn't expect that Viscount Somi would accept Hyde into his family. This really surprised me. Roland, who had lived in this world for many years, immediately understood what Nightingale meant. If the two families really had a good relationship, Viscount Somi should have helped her brother to rebuild the family business after Old Guyland's death. This was not uncommon in noble stories. The fallen heir would make a comeback with the help of others and repay them with several times the wealth. Some even let their descendants marry each other. These were all stories that everyone loved to talk about. But it was not the same for the only heir to change his surname. This meant that the Guyland family would be completely severed and the title of Viscount would no longer be passed on. Now that Roland had decided to take back all the enfeoffment power, it did not matter whether Hyde was a noble or not. However, from the perspective of a traditional noble, this was even more serious than a plot to steal money. It did not seem like something that a family with a good relationship would do. If you think it's strange, you can check it out. Roland sat back at the desk and spread out a stack of parchments. This was his job every time he went to a place, to check the local population and financial situation. I have Sylvie and the gods' punishment witches to protect me, so I'll be absolutely safe in the camp. You don't have to stay with me all the time. Nightingale hesitated. But this is the Guyland family's business, and it has nothing to do with me. Of course you can't say that your father's territory has nothing to do with you. Roland thought to himself, and your childhood mansion is also on that land. It's rare for me to come here, and I don't have to worry about being chased by the church. I'll just take it as a revisit. Perhaps it was the words, childhood mansion, that moved Nightingale. After a long silence, she made up her mind. Then you have to promise me that if you want to leave the camp, you must call me back first. Besides, I'll just take a look. I won't do anything else. I know. Roland smiled and shook his head. Now he felt as if he was forcing her to go. However, it was better to face the past than to keep it in her heart. Only after experiencing it could she really let it go. Nightingale was still too young and too. The next day, at dawn, Nightingale left the camp and walked along the road to the east of Silver City. In her memory, her home was very big. In addition to a big two-story house, there was also a wide farmland that was large enough to cover her footprints. Beside the farmland was a stream that flowed out of the mountain forest. In summer, she could catch a lot of crabs. Further east, she would come across a steep ravine. Her family often said that there might be a hidden gem vein under the ravine. When she got married, they would give her the biggest gem in the ravine as a dowry. But after leaving Silver City with the Witch Cooperation Association, Nightingale gradually understood that her family's territory could be counted as one of the lowest among the nobles. If it was in other places, it was estimated that it wouldn't be much different from a knight's territory. The water source was a stream, so the farmland area was inevitably limited. As for the gem vein in the ravine, it was probably only her family's wishful thinking. Even if it really existed, they wouldn't have enough gold royals to develop it. However, when she set foot on this land again several years later, the impression in her memory still did not fade in the slightest. Even though it looked a lot smaller and the ridge full of weeds was no longer endless, but the memories of her childhood added an indescribable sense of freshness to it. She couldn't help but understand what Wendy meant when she said, "Getting rid of the nightmare of the past doesn't mean that we have to cut off the past." When approaching the location of the mansion, Nightingale couldn't help but be startled. She had thought that this unattended mansion would become dilapidated, but she didn't expect that it not only looked new, but also expanded several times on the original basis. Passing through the courtyard wall, she saw that there were many people gathered inside. They were dressed in simple clothes, and some of them even looked no different from beggars. Several servants shuttled through the crowd, giving them bowls of hot porridge, and from time to time the crowd burst into a burst of gratitude. Is this relief food distribution? She followed the crowd's gaze to the end of the courtyard, and saw a man standing at the door of the house, smiling in response to the crowd's gratitude. Whether it was the way he dressed or the way he behaved, he was very much like a noble. That man was her former brother. Chapter 878. The expected chaos did not come to Valencia, and the situation was completely beyond Bale's imagination. As the clerk of several castellans, he naturally knew what it meant to break into the city: looting, killing, disorder, exile. Whether it was a knight, a mob, or a pirate, it made no difference. It was the same when King Timothy put down the rebellion and when the new duke took over the throne. The food and wealth in the city were the best rewards for those who seized power, and it was only natural for them to keep as much as possible, just like the nobles were born to be nobler than the common people. The records in the history books had proved its correctness many times. However, the situation was completely different this time. Roland's army not only did not attack the people, but also carried out relief and pacification work. A large pile of wheat found in the Duke's castle was cooked into oatmeal and distributed to the hungry people. A large number of recruitment notices were posted in the center of the square, and in addition to food, The participants could also get a certain amount of pay. Did Roland's soldiers not mind that these things, which originally belonged to them, were distributed to a group of unrelated people? Did Prince Roland travel thousands of miles to conquer Valencia just to squander his own treasury? Throughout all kinds of books, Bale had never seen such a ridiculous precedent in history. But these only surprised him at most, and there was another thing that made the clerk feel a deep fear. That was the castle fire a few days ago. The propaganda saying that the rats set the fire was full of loopholes. He had served 3 dukes and lived in the castle for more than 20 years, but he had never found the entrance or exit of the secret passage. For such a life-or-death escape route, it must be designed to be very hidden and safe, and it would be difficult to find it even from the inside, let alone from the outside. If those guys had this ability, they would not have been reduced to the rats on the Black Street. The fire was set by Roland's people. After realizing this, Bale felt his heart suddenly clench. For the first time, the nobles were no longer nobler than the common people, and their lives were the same as those who were stuffed into the city walls, without any security to speak of. Perhaps even more dangerous. The big families that had not been wiped out by Roland apparently also thought of this, and their reaction was very direct. That was to leave Valencia, and even Grey Castle. So what next? Would such a thing befall him? Over the past few days, the scribe's hair had been falling out in clumps, and the area of his head had grown larger and larger. This fear did not come from blind imagination. In the past 10 years or so, he was known as a nobleman without a title, or the nobleman closest to nobility. He had served many lords, seen many things, and read more books than most of the children of the aristocratic families. Because of this, no matter if it was Garcia's looting or the change of control of the eastern region, he was able to get through them unscathed. Even if the people in the city were sifted again and again like rice straws, he still had the energy to observe and record the scenes. But now, Bell could not even fall asleep. Although the powerful army had not attacked any non-nobles, even ordinary people who had worked for the big families, he was not sure that they would continue to do so in the future. He couldn't beg those families to take him with them because he was still a commoner. He didn't want to sit still and wait for death. He kept thinking that he had to do something. In front of the flickering candlelight, the clerk looked at the chronicle of Valencia that was still being written. Thinking of what he had written, Bell could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Yes, he almost forgot about this. Then he quickly flipped to the last few pages, tore them off, and lit the pieces of paper one by one until they were ashes. No, maybe this was not enough. Bell thought for a moment, took out a quill, dipped it in ink, and put it on the paper. No matter what the result is, you have to record it truthfully, understand? Duke William's words rang in his ears. Of course, he would record it truthfully now. This was the duty of a clerk. However, there was no absolute objectivity in this world. Now that he lived in the city ruled by Roland, it was not strange for him to be a little biased, or in other words, this was part of objectivity. Bell took a deep breath and quickly put down the quill. The messenger sent by the great King Roland Wimbledon arrived in his loyal Valencia today. In the First Army's camp on the outskirts of Redwater City. Your Majesty, there's a secret letter from the eastern region. Nightingale jumped out of the mist with a gray goshawk in her hand. The goshawk raised its claws at Roland and grunted discontentedly, as if complaining that the letter was too heavy. There were 6 rolls of paper tied to its claws, which almost took up all the space between its legs. The flying messenger did not calm down until Nightingale handed it a handful of grilled fish. This can't be considered a secret letter anymore. Roland opened the 6 densely written notes in turn and quickly skimmed through them. The sender was Iron Axe, and the main content of the letter was a routine post-war summary and situation report. The first half of the battle was exactly as he had predicted. The Eastern Front Army easily captured Valencia, and the mortars showed their great power in the battle. Facing the firepower of the 12-pound field artillery, the enemy was unable to fight back, even if it was a siege. However, when he read the second half of the letter, Roland was a little surprised. What's wrong? Is there a problem over there? Nightingale asked. Well, It's not really a problem. It's just a little strange. He handed the fifth letter to her and said, "Look at this. Burning the dungeon that imprisoned the nobles?" Nightingale glanced at it and immediately caught the key point. "Didn't you order this?" Roland shook his head and said, "No, I just told him that he would be fully responsible for the war on the Eastern Front." "Then, what's strange about it?" She was puzzled. Since he's fully responsible, it's normal for him to take any action, right? What's more, those guys have bad intentions. They haven't surrendered to you for so long. Now, not only did you sweep them clean, but you can also use this opportunity to clean up the rats. It's like killing two birds with one stone. "You're right," Roland said, stroking his chin. However, he still felt that this method of handling the situation was a little too artistic. The eastern region was where the second prince had lived for a long time. Capturing the city was only the first step, and the next step was the open and veiled struggle with the surrendered nobles. Therefore, he handed over most of the novice officials trained by the city hall to the Eastern Front Army and appointed Iron Axe, who was from the Sand Nation, as the commander of the Eastern Front Army. According to his expectation, after capturing Valencia, in order to eliminate the enemy, Iron Axe would most likely exert his torture skills to the extreme. Even the high priests of the church could not stand the torture of the Magians, let alone those delicate nobles. Through bloody trials and executions, he would gradually destroy the old power of the nobles and establish a new order in the eastern region. But directly burning it did not seem to be in line with Iron Axe's style. Roland thought for a moment and decided to put this little surprise to the back of his mind. He would wait until the two armies converged before asking. After all, as Nightingale had said, the effect of this fire was surprisingly good. The big families were directly scared out of their wits. They no longer cared about their own fiefdoms and began to swarm out of the country. Chapter 879. It seems that I have to work harder. Roland shrugged inwardly. It was not a glorious thing to be left behind by his subordinates. Fortunately, Redwater City had basically recovered its stability. 70% of the nobles who had passed the screening had decided to continue their original businesses, while the rest hoped to try their luck in City Hall. Although the basic requirement to apply for the administrative examination was literacy, Roland believed that these people had little chance of passing the final examination and becoming official officials. After all, it was not easy to change the habits of the nobles. Of course, even being a clerk was much better than being killed. There were even 3 nobles who wanted to join the First Army. They were all knights, and under Nightingale's observation, they didn't have any malicious intentions. However, Nightingale still adhered to the decision made at the beginning of the establishment of the army and rejected their applications. After solving the problem of reclaiming the feudal rights, the work efficiency of Redwater City and the surrounding areas was obviously much more efficient. In just over a week, more than 20,000 people had boarded the ships to Neverwinter, and more people were still gathering in Redwater City. On the surface, it seemed that giving up the small towns and villages had reduced the territory that could be controlled, but in fact, it had greatly increased the control of the city hall. In this era where even roads were scarce, it was no different from a fool's dream to implement the government's decree in the countryside. It was barely possible to put together a set of leadership within a year, but it was impossible to make grassroots cadres flourish everywhere. Barav had asked him more than once why he insisted on transporting people back to Neverwinter instead of unifying the kingdom and letting everything continue as before, but he had never given a comprehensive and systematic answer. Because the director of City Hall could not imagine how many people a coal and iron complex industry could absorb, and it was difficult to understand how much energy and time it would take to build such an industry. And most importantly, those remote territories could not really operate freely. From the perspective of resources, it was a waste to keep them. Therefore, it was more suitable for the current situation of Greycastle to concentrate the population in several major cities with convenient water systems and transportation. From the moment of the land reform, Roland could truly be considered to have jurisdiction over the Redwater area. His next target was naturally Silver City. Compared to the behemoth Redwater City, It was much easier to deal with this satellite city of the old king's city. It was originally an ordinary fief, no different from the dozens of fiefs surrounding the king's city. It was not until the discovery of the first open-sky silver mine that its existence became special. As more and more precious metal or veins were excavated, the place became more and more lively, and finally changed into what it was today. Considering the importance of Silver City's production to Greycastle's coinage, the next few lords were not only the good guy, Earl William, who was loyal to Wimbledon, but their power was also limited. For decades, there were almost no other nobles who were in theft. In other words, as long as the city lord expressed his stance, Silver City would be his. And with the bloodline of Wimbledon III and his identity as the highest heir, Roland believed it wouldn't be difficult to convince him. But what made him a little concerned was that this city built on a mineral vein was also Nightingale's hometown. Although every time he asked her about it, the answer he got was, "I've already broken off relations with the Guyland family, so you don't have to worry about my opinion." He always felt that Nightingale seemed to be avoiding something. But the busy government affairs prevented Roland from spending too much time on guessing, so he had to put this matter aside for the time being. On the fourth day after receiving Iron Axe's secret letter, the First Army's Eastern Front Army marched along the artificial canal into the territory of Silver City. Almost the same as when they entered Redwater City, Earl William led a team out of the city to welcome them. After a warm greeting, they invited them to a banquet. The difference was that the welcoming team in Redwater City were all Infeft nobles, while the Old City Lord's team included many merchants, including his old acquaintance Hogg. In the evening, the Earl's opening speech set the tone for the banquet. He was willing to surrender his Infeft rights and fully support His Majesty's new policies. There was a sudden warm applause in the hall, which made the latter swallow all the words he had prepared. With Hogg's help, the welcome banquet turned into a business meeting. "Don't you always ask me how the machine in the mine works?" he said proudly in front of a group of merchants. "Now, the real inventor is standing in front of you. It's His Majesty. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You don't have to go to the Western region, you can get the answer directly in Silver City." The merchants immediately swarmed over. "Your Majesty, can you tell us why it's so strong? I don't know if you're willing to sell more of the rail system. Diamond's Chamber of Commerce is looking forward to cooperating with Neverwinter. Your Majesty, do you still remember the Swift Sail Association? 2 years ago, we provided you with several sailboats to transport refugees from the eastern region. In terms of trade strength, we're definitely one of the best chambers of commerce in the central region. If possible, the Swift Sail Association hopes to purchase a complete set of steam engine manufacturing equipment. Of course, the price will definitely be generous." Thinking of the good news that the female merchant Marjorie had revealed to him, Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. Hogg will bring a large number of merchants to the western region. He did not expect that he would be the first one to arrive. If the rest of Greycastle was like Silver City, how wonderful the world would be. After finally satisfying the curiosity of the merchants, he finally found a chance to be alone with the old castellan. The two walked through the hall and onto the balcony where the evening breeze blew, temporarily isolating the hustle and bustle of the banquet behind them. Roland held a glass of wine and looked down at the city under the night sky for a while before saying, "Don't you feel it's a pity to hand over the enfeoffment just like that? I've never really owned it, so what's there to feel pity about?" Earl William smiled. "Your father and your father's father, although they didn't say it explicitly, would never allow Silver City to have its own group of followers. The William family's motto is never to be infeft, so to me, it's not as important as you think." He paused for a moment. "Besides, I don't need this power." "You don't need it?" Roland could not help but ask curiously. The original intention of enfeoffment is to strengthen and consolidate one's own power to prevent others from spying on it. Silver City does not have this risk. Anyone who has designs on this city is tantamount to openly challenging the authority of the Wimbledon royal family. Therefore, as long as the family remains loyal, there is no need to worry about being harmed. The Earl took a sip of wine. On the other hand, enfeoffment, in a sense, is also a form of weakening oneself. It divides the resources that originally belonged to oneself to others in exchange for the latter's loyalty. Rather than letting these resources be in the hands of others, I prefer to manage it myself. Do you know how much the output of Silver City has increased in the past 20 years? Roland shook his head. A full 16 times. For this, I have invested most of my energy, the old castellan said in high spirits. In the beginning, it was only an open-air silver mine. Now, there are more than 10 types of mineral veins. Similarly, in the beginning, there were only mining teams sent by the royal family. Now, not only are there all kinds of ore and jewelry merchants, there are also many auxiliary industries developed through mining, such as oil lamps, mining shovels, and so on. Your steam engine can also be counted as one of them. Am I right? Indeed, Roland said with a smile. This feeling is like raising a child and watching it gradually grow up. Tell me, how could I bear to cut it open and give it to others? Therefore, I do not need such power. At this point, the Earl let out a long sigh. Your Majesty, are you willing to let me continue to manage this shining city for you? Of course, if you are willing. He raised his wine glass to the Earl. The two looked at each other and smiled. Then, the glasses gently clinked together, making a crisp sound. By the way, Roland drank the wine in one gulp and changed the topic. Do you know anything about the Guyland family? Guyland? Earl William thought for a while before he raised his eyebrows and said, I have some impression of them, but I can't remember them clearly. After all, Silver City has not had a new noble for a long time. These families have existed here before the silver mine was discovered. If I remember correctly, the last Guyland should have changed his surname 2 years ago. Now that land belongs to the Somi family. Chapter 880. Change his surname? What's going on? Roland asked with a frown. He probably feels that he can't do anything alone, so it's more convenient to merge with another family. William seemed to be a little surprised that he cared so much about an inconspicuous little noble. If he wants to maintain a decent life, he needs a lot of expenses. If he doesn't manage it well, the territory will be a burden. Is it possible that he was forced to do it? For example, to seize territory or something. This is unlikely, Roland muttered. I've seen them several times at previous banquets, but I didn't talk to them in detail. Guyland, who changed his surname, got along well with the Somi family and didn't seem to be forced. If you want to know more, I can ask Viscount Somi to come here right now. There's no need, Roland interrupted Nightingale's words through her whisper. I'm just asking casually, it's nothing important. But it seems that the member of the Guyland family didn't come this time. If her brother, Hyde, was here, Nightingale would have recognized him. The banquet was invited according to the usual rules. This is my oversight, the old castellan said apologetically with his hand on his chest. The meaning of Guyland's words was clear. Even if Guyland changed his surname and became a branch of the Somi family, he was still not on the list of invitations. Silver City's developed mining industry had driven commerce, which made the style of this place somewhat similar to that of the City of Glow. Compared to titles and titles, people valued wealth and strength more. But it also showed that the Guyland family was indeed almost forgotten. After Nightingale's death, Hyde had inherited his father's title of Viscount. It was sad enough to be in this situation. When Roland returned to the camp, he had just drawn the tent curtain when Nightingale took the initiative to explain. Your Majesty, I'm not concerned about Hyde. Since I left Silver City, I've had nothing to do with the Guyland family. Please believe me. I was just a little surprised at that time. Seeing the not what you think look on Nightingale's face, Roland could not help but want to tease her. But when he thought of Nightingale's temperament, if she took it seriously and insisted on telling the truth, it would be his turn to have a headache. So he coughed twice and nodded lightly. I know. You never lie to me about this. You didn't believe me. No, not completely. Nightingale immediately pointed out. Oh no, I was a little joking, but her ability detected it. Roland could only take a deep breath and get rid of the distracting thoughts in his mind. He looked into her eyes and said seriously, "I believe in you." This time it was Nightingale's turn to feel uncomfortable. She blushed and looked away unconsciously. "I was really just surprised. It has nothing to do with the person who betrayed me." Although Roland wanted to say that it was normal for him to care about it, it was better for him to play along. "What are you surprised about? The Somis used to have a good relationship with my father," Nightingale said in a low voice. "After my father passed away, they came to visit me in Old Guyland's mansion. But when he found out that I was a witch, Old Guyland forbade me from seeing them again. I didn't expect that Viscount Somi would accept Hyde as a member of the family. This is really surprising." "I see." Roland, who had lived in this world for many years, immediately understood what she meant. If the two families really had a good relationship, Viscount Somi should have helped her brother rebuild the family after Old Guyland's death. This was not uncommon in the stories of the nobles. The fallen heir would make a comeback with the help of others and repay them with several times the wealth, or even marry their descendants. These were all stories that people loved to talk about. But it was not the same for the only heir to change his surname. This meant that the Guyland family would be completely severed, and the title of Viscount would not be passed on. Now that Roland had decided to take back all the enfeoffment power, it did not matter whether he was a noble or not. However, from the perspective of the traditional nobles, this was more serious than seizing wealth. It did not seem like something that a family with a good relationship would do. "If you think it's strange, you can go and check it out." Roland sat back at the desk and spread out a stack of parchment papers. This was the job he had to do every time he went to a place, to check the local population and financial situation. "I have Sylvie and the gods' punishment witches to protect me. I'll be absolutely safe in the camp. You don't have to stay with me all the time." Nightingale hesitated. "But these are the Guyland family's affairs. They have nothing to do with me." "Of course, I can't say that your father's territory has nothing to do with it. Although now it has to be handed over to the state," he thought, "and the mansion you lived in when you were a child is also on that piece of land. It's rare to come here, and I don't have to worry about being chased by the church." Perhaps the words, "childhood mansion," moved Nightingale. After a long silence, she made a decision. "Then you have to promise me that if you want to leave the camp, you have to call me back first. Besides, I'll just take a look. I won't do anything else." "I know." Roland smiled and shook his head. Now it felt like he was forcing her to go. However, it was better to face the past than to keep it in her heart. Only after experiencing it could she really let it go. Nightingale was still too young and a little too young. At dawn the next day, Nightingale left the camp and walked along the main road to the east of Silver City. In her memory, her home was very big. In addition to a big two-story house, there was also a wide farmland that was large enough to cover her footprints. Beside the farmland was a stream that flowed out of the forest. In summer, she could catch a lot of crabs. Further east, she would encounter a steep ravine. Her family often said that there might be a hidden gem vein underneath. When she got married, they would give her the biggest gem in the ravine as a dowry. However, after leaving Silver City with the Witch Cooperation Association, Nightingale gradually understood that her family's territory was considered to be the lowest among the nobles. If it was placed in other places, it would probably not be much different from the average knight's territory. The water source was a small stream, so the farmland area was inevitably limited. As for the gem vein in the ravine, it was probably the wishful thinking of her family. Even if it really existed, there was not enough golden dragon to develop it. However, when she set foot on this land again several years later, the impression in her memory still did not fade in the slightest. Even though it looked a lot smaller and the ridge full of weeds was no longer endless, but the memories of her childhood added an indescribable sense of freshness to it. She could not help but understand what Vendi meant when she said, "Getting rid of the nightmare of the past does not mean cutting off the past." As she approached the location of the mansion, Nightingale could not help but be startled. She originally thought that this uncared-for house would become dilapidated, but she did not expect that it not only looked new, but also expanded several times from the original foundation. After passing through the courtyard wall, she saw that there were many people gathered inside. They were dressed in simple and crude clothes, and some of them were no different from beggars. A few servants shuttled through the crowd, handing out bowls of hot porridge to them. From time to time, the crowd would burst into a burst of gratitude. Was this relief food distribution? She followed the gaze of the people to the end of the courtyard. A man stood at the door of the house, smiling in response to the gratitude of the crowd. Whether it was the way he dressed or the way he behaved, he was very much like a well-off noble. That person was her former brother. Chapter 881. According to the Lord of Silver City, it was impossible for the down-and-out Guyland family to have enough money to help the poor. That was to say, the expansion of the house and the distribution of hot porridge should be the work of Viscount Somi. Regardless of the reason why they chose to bring Hyde into their family instead of selflessly helping him out like the rumors spread among the nobles, the outcome didn't seem too bad. A person who was willing to give money and food to the needy and did not ask for anything in return was not a bad person. Moreover, the Somi family had expressed their goodwill through Hyde, which was, in a sense, a kind of compensation. To say the least, even if Hyde had been living a terrible life, she would not have intervened. She just came here to see her childhood home and to reminisce about the past. When Nightingale was about to go somewhere else, she suddenly had a strange feeling. She stopped. What's wrong? She thought. The poor people in ragged clothes, the servants who maintained order, the guards who guarded the mansion, and the nobles who presided over the overall situation. She glanced around the courtyard again and could not help but frown. Hyde did not wear a god's stone of retaliation, not even the worst kind. In the mist, his appearance and clothes were clearly visible, but the guard at the gate of the mansion was mostly covered by a black hole, and only the scabbard at his feet could be seen. So that's why. Nightingale suddenly realized the source of the strange feeling. Why is a viscount's heir not wearing a god's stone of retaliation? Even the guards are wearing one. Is it because Hyde has no prejudice against witches? Lin Sanjiu immediately denied this answer. She still remembered the disgusted look on Hyde's face when he said, "I wish I didn't have this sister. Witches should go to hell and be the company of demons." Even though her ability at that time could not distinguish lies, she could tell that he meant it just by looking at his eyes. Because he has no money to buy a god's stone? That might be the case for the poor nobles, but it was not applicable in this situation. After a moment of hesitation, Nightingale turned around and walked into the courtyard. The moment she passed through the gate of the mansion, she heard the conversation between the two guards. Nobles are really scary people. This guy's life isn't much different from ours, and he's as obedient as a dog in front of his lordship. But after changing his clothes, he's completely different. Could it be that this is what his lordship always talks about? Don't talk nonsense, the other man scolded. The Viscount is in the house now. If anyone hears you, tell him that you can forget about this month's salary. Don't worry. My ears are very sensitive. I'll be able to detect anyone approaching. The man shrugged. Besides, I didn't make that up. The adults have a bad temper, and they scolded me so loudly that the people upstairs and downstairs could hear them clearly. Since you know he has a bad temper, all the more you shouldn't cause trouble at this time, the latter said impatiently. No matter how His Excellency scolds him, he's still a noble. What are you? Is there a surname in the clan? Even the foreman of the neighboring village is more famous than you. If it wasn't for your uncle asking me to watch over you, I wouldn't have cared what you were saying. Yes, I'll shut up, okay? He suddenly froze. What's wrong? Why do I feel like someone passed by? He looked around and said, maybe it's an illusion. Ignoring the guards at the door, Nightingale went through the wall and quickly found the Viscount's room through the god's stone field. The higher the status, the better the god's stone. Nightingale often used this method to identify the target when she carried out assassination missions in the past, and she rarely failed. When she heard that Somi was here, she vaguely realized that the distribution of porridge in the courtyard might not be as simple as it seemed. The Viscount was not alone in the room. In addition to a fully armed knight who acted as a guard, there was also an old man in a robe standing in front of the desk. He looked like a scholar from the old king's city. "Lord, you shouldn't have lost your temper with Sir Hyde yesterday. Although he has yielded to you, it's easier for him to play his role properly if you treat him leniently." "I know, but I couldn't control myself." Datsomi, who was sitting in a high-backed chair, pounded the table angrily. "It took me more than 10 years to get to this point. The 2 lands in the east were about to belong to me, but I didn't expect that Roland Wimbledon would take them all away with just a few words. Did you hear what that old bastard said? He's willing to take the lead in handing over the enfeoffment rights and fully support His Majesty's new policy. Does he think that others don't need it? I'm so angry." "Smile, my lord, keep smiling. You've already complained about it last night," the scholar said, stroking his beard. "Since you're so unwilling, why don't you refuse it on the spot?" "Ah." Dot choked and then said unhappily, "Even Timothy's Royal Knight group couldn't withstand a single blow from Roland. How can I refuse? Do you want me to die on the spot?" "So these complaints are meaningless except to make things worse. In that case, do you still want to continue?" "Damn it," the Viscount said angrily after a long silence. "His Majesty only took back the feudal power. You can follow Earl William's example and manage the existing industries in your territory well. Then, you won't suffer too much loss. But without jurisdiction, those greedy patrols will come here sooner or later. What excuse can I use to stop them?" Dutch shook his head repeatedly. "You know what I'm selling. Once I'm found, I'll be hanged. Then give up this part of your business," the scholar said without hesitation. "I told you that this is not a long-term plan. Now that you've accumulated enough capital and the church has completely lost its control, you can focus on the regular business. Otherwise, why did you go through so much trouble to get the Guyland family's land? Isn't it just to get off the single log bridge?" The Viscount hesitated for a long time. Apparently, he was reluctant to give up another part of his business. After a quarter of an hour, he nodded firmly and said, "I see. This will be the last time. When Hyde is done, I'll talk to him personally. Don't stop abruptly, lest you arouse suspicion. It's okay to put it up for a while longer. You just need to tell them not to come back for more goods." "Okay, I'll do as you say." After deciding to give up the unstable business mentioned by the scholar, Dot completely relaxed. He leaned back in his chair and laughed. The 2 from the Guyland family must have no idea what they missed. In that case, I have no choice but to accept it. I'm afraid that Hyde still thinks his parents died in a refugee riot. Chapter 882. Why did Datsomi mention this? At that time, a serious riot had indeed broken out in Silver City. One after another, mining accidents had led to the deaths of hundreds of absentee workers. The employer was only willing to compensate the freedmen for their losses, turning a blind eye to the refugees they had hired at a low price. This infuriated the families of the victims. The refugees who were unwilling to wait for death swarmed out of the mines, burning, killing, and looting. In the end, the Knight Regiment of King's City suppressed them and restored order. Her parents did not return until the siblings were sent to Old Guyland's house. Nightingale learned the cause of her parents' death from Old Guyland. But the Viscount's words did not seem to be the case. She did not expect that an accident that happened more than 10 years ago could still subvert everything. If what Roland said was true, the investigation would not only focus on the relationship between Hyde and the Somi family. Nightingale quietly left the room, passed through the floors, and came to the basement. She then activated the sigil of listening that she always carried with her. She had prepared it so that Roland could call her back at any time, but she did not expect that it would come in handy in such a way. "It's indeed very suspicious," Roland, who was on the other end of the sigil, replied after listening to the story. "So you want to stay in the mansion for a longer time?" "Yes, I want to wait until nightfall to ask Hyde personally. Maybe he knows something." Nightingale hesitated. "Sorry, Your Majesty, There's nothing to apologize for," Roland quickly interrupted her. "I'll wait for you in the camp until you finish your investigation. Don't worry, it's very safe here. As long as I don't go out, I won't violate the agreement. But you have to pay attention to your own safety. Don't be too impulsive. No matter what the situation is, report to me every 4 hours." Nightingale felt a surge of warmth in her heart. She was silent for a while and then replied softly, "Yes, I understand." Nightingale did not leave the cellar until the moonlight disappeared from the skylight. She walked toward Hyde's room. Before that, she had already confirmed her brother's location. The moon setting in the west meant that it was close to 3 o'clock in the morning. Most people had fallen asleep, and even the guards on night duty were dozing off. Therefore, it was the best time for her to act. Hyde's bedroom was on the first floor of the mansion, close to the backyard. Normally, only servants and less important guests would stay here. Hyde's bedroom had proved the two guards' words. Viscount did not take the heir of the Guyland family seriously. At the same time, Nightingale realized that the kindness of the Somis in her childhood might have been a pretense. However, the other party's contemptuous attitude made her feel a lot more relaxed. There was not a single person guarding the entire hall. In this way, even if something happened, she would have enough time to escape. After entering the bedroom, Nightingale straightforwardly pulled her brother out of the quilt. When he woke up from his dream, before he could completely recover, a dagger with a cold glint was already pressed against his neck. Screaming for help, crying for help, "You will die, understand?" She stood behind Hyde and whispered. The latter hurriedly nodded. "Very good. Now turn around and see who I am." Hyde did as he was told. However, when he saw the face of the newcomer in the dim moonlight, his eyes suddenly widened. If it were not for the dagger on his neck, he would have screamed out loud. However, he managed to restrain himself in the end. After making sure that Hyde had calmed down, Nightingale slowly withdrew the dagger. Why are you here?" Hyde suppressed his trembling voice and asked, "Shouldn't you be dead?" The moment she heard him speak, memories of the past suddenly surged into her mind. At that moment, Nightingale felt as if she had returned to old Guyland's house. The pain of being betrayed by her own brother and the oppression of her distant relatives made her feel so much pain that she wanted to die. Even her consciousness became a little dazed. It was this person in front of her who had personally torn apart her most vulnerable side and exposed it in front of an insecure outsider. "Why do you say that?" She bit her tongue to dispel the distracting thoughts in her mind. Because... Hyde swallowed his saliva. Timothy searched King City and the surrounding cities several times and claimed that all the witches had been executed by him. "No, but, sister, I don't want you to die. When I heard the news, I was also very shocked. I thought that if you didn't leave without permission, maybe you would be fine." Veronica. She had not heard this name for a long time. However, after so many years, she was not as trusting as she used to be. The trembling magic told her the answer. The latter half of Hyde's words were all lies. "How did you get together with Viscount Somi?" This." He paused for a moment. After the death of old Guyland, there were constant quarrels in the family. I don't know the details, but I know that when I inherited the title, there was almost no money left in the family. At that time, Lord Viscount came knocking on my door, and I had no other choice. Lie. He forced you to join the Somi family? Yes, he said that if I didn't agree, he would get rid of me. Then what are you doing for him now? Nightingale asked calmly. Helping the poor? No, Hyde gritted his teeth. He was just using me as a cover. In fact, he was selling Dreamland water. Those rats who helped him transport goods were among the crowd. I only discovered his trick recently. The magic did not respond to the first half of Hyde's words, but the latter half was still a lie. Nightingale found that she was not angry, but rather relaxed. Yes, this was the feeling. This was the state of a normal conversation. Endless lies, mixed truths. People's hearts were always changing. Even if they were connected by blood, they could not hear each other's true thoughts. Since the awakening of her ability, she had long been accustomed to such situations. whether it was in the face of lies or in the process of stripping the truth from layers of deception. Instead, it was Roland's conversation, in which she could not detect the pulsation of magic, that made it difficult for her to adapt. At this moment, the shadowy killer who lurked in the darkness and made the nobles in the central region tremble had returned. "What's your next plan?" Upon hearing this, Hyde suddenly fell to the ground and begged, "Sister, please help me." "Help you?" He crawled 2 steps forward. "I know it was my fault. But I'm your brother. Lord Viscount doesn't treat me as a noble at all. You've seen it, he actually gave me the servant's house to use. The restoration of this mansion is just a cover-up. If I continue to stay here, he will attack me sooner or later. So you want me to take you away? Go. Then there will be nothing left, right?" Hyde shook his head in panic and then said with hatred, "You killed old Guylan, didn't you? Although I don't know what kind of ability you used, you can easily enter this place, so you can definitely enter his bedroom. Sister, kill him. As long as he dies, I will have a chance to become a real Somi noble. Then you can kill the other heirs one by one. This territory and all the properties of the Somi family will belong to us." Nightingale stared into his eyes and did not answer for a long time until Hyde lowered his head anxiously again. Then she said, "Before that, I want to ask you a question." Yes. The younger brother answered quickly. Chapter 883. She had thought it would take him a long time to think about this question, but she did not expect to get an answer so quickly. "Why?" Hyde was startled. "Because you're a witch. Her magic power did not beat. So that's why." Nightingale suddenly understood many things. Witches were the devil's minions and the incarnation of the fallen. Once a witch became a witch, she would gradually lose her feelings as a human. At that time, this theory was deeply rooted in people's hearts. Perhaps the moment Hyde learned of her awakening, she was no longer a human in his eyes, let alone a sister and a brother who were related by blood. The so-called betrayal was just a way to protect himself by striking first. Hyde probably still thought so, and it was precisely because he completely trusted his own judgment that he answered so naturally. Later, Hyde said a lot more. For example, he was ignorant before and did not know that it was a false accusation made by the church. He also said that he was now deeply remorseful and hoped that she could forgive him. But Nightingale did not listen to these words. The thoughts in her mind were like a storm, making it difficult for her to recover. So she should not blame him at all. Was it because most people would have made the same choice? For him, the one he betrayed was not his own sister, but a demon who would lose her humanity sooner or later. Since it was a demon, it was understandable that there was no trust between them. But was it true? She was clearly asking about Hyde, but her consciousness unconsciously drifted to another person. That person was also a noble, but she had never seen him before, let alone by blood. If betraying a witch was a matter of course, then he should have sent Anna to the gallows long ago. He had neither fear nor hatred for witches. Except for curiosity, his eyes were clear and easy to understand, even though she had threatened him with a knife. Scenes flashed by quickly, as if they were going back in time, and finally stopped at the moment before the heavy snow fell. It was the first winter after they met. "I don't think she can't survive the months of demons. But she said she wouldn't lose to the demonic bite, and I believe her. How could you believe a witch? We're cursed by the devil." "Really? I believe you too." The sea of memories rippled with these words. Nightingale took a deep breath and pulled her consciousness back to reality. "Wait here. If someone comes looking for you, do what you have to do. Pretend that I was never here." Wait, where are you going?" She sheathed the dagger at her waist and disappeared into the fog. "To finish what I have to do." As Hyde had said, she could have broken into Viscount Somi's bedroom and forced him to tell the whole story with a dagger. Most of the nobles would be scared out of their wits when they saw the gleaming tip of a knife. They would answer every question, hating the fact that they didn't have 2 mouths. Some of the more stubborn ones would spill out their secrets without hesitation after their fingernails were cut off. She had already verified this many times. If her parents' death was really related to the Viscount, she would naturally let him know what it meant to pay with blood. However, Nightingale didn't want to do that at the moment, especially after what had just happened. She was no longer alone. She now had someone she could trust without a doubt, and she was also deeply trusted by others. Compared to the Shadow Assassin's approach, she wanted to try to solve this matter in another way. If it was Roland, he would definitely not want to see her stained with too much unnecessary blood, right? After crossing the world of mist, Nightingale entered Dot's study in a few flashes. Several dark black holes that looked like ink-colored balls stood in the black and white world. She didn't care about the sleeping guard leaning against the door. Instead, she set her eyes on a field of God's stone next to the bookcase. She slowly walked to the wall. The straight wall suddenly twisted. The contours bent and shrunk like a clump of hair that had lost its source of nourishment. The thing underneath was exposed. Through the deformed contours, she saw details that ordinary people couldn't see. A thin metal rod was buried under the wall. One part was connected to the bookcase, and the other was connected to the black ball. This was a very common mechanism. Nightingale easily destroyed the hanging bell under the mechanism. Then she pushed a seemingly ordinary book. The secret compartment opened almost without making any sound. There was a God's stone of retaliation embedded in the hidden box, but this was not a problem for her. Before she was an adult, old Guylan had found a rat instructor to teach her all the skills that a qualified thief should have. After several years of practice, she had already mastered the skill of opening all kinds of locks with copper needles. After opening 3 or 4 iron boxes, Nightingale found what she was looking for. It was a recent account book, which recorded the batches, buyers, and quantities of Dreamland water. Just as she expected, the nobles always liked to hide their important items in places that they thought were secret. With this record and the goods in the mansion that had not been sold, the evidence was conclusive. Nightingale returned to the basement and reported the whole thing to Roland. When the sky turned bright, the First Army, who had received the order to rush over, had already surrounded the mansion. 3 days later, Nightingale appeared in front of Hyde again. Hyde had just been released from prison. He looked so haggard and dazed that he almost looked like a walking corpse. It was not until he saw Nightingale that a trace of color appeared in his eyes. Anger and hatred. Viscount Somi has been sentenced to death by hanging. The rest of the family members have to serve 20 years of labor. 2 fiefs belong to the kingdom. Is this what you made me wait for? Walking into a deserted alley, Hyde could no longer suppress his emotions. He growled at her. Take everything away from me and leave me with nothing? You should feel lucky that you're not regarded as a member of the Somi family, Nightingale said calmly. Compared to the Viscount, at least you're still alive. That's just because you want me to continue to suffer so that you can laugh at me. 8 years ago, it was like this again. You killed old Guylan and left. Do you know what kind of life I've been living since then? I thought you would help me when I finally got the chance to take over the Somi family's territory, but you ruined it. Hyde clenched his fists. I don't have a title or a fief now. Are you satisfied now? You haven't forgiven me at all, Veronica. You liar. All you want is revenge. I should have known. As he spoke, there was a hint of sobbing in his roar. Then he curled up his body and sobbed softly. Nothing. I have nothing. After a long silence, Nightingale said, Yes, I haven't forgiven you, and I never will. The more similar a person is, the more unforgivable a betrayal is. She paused. But you don't have nothing. At least I gave you freedom. Hyde, whose face was covered with snot and filth, looked up. No matter old Guylan, the Somi family, or anyone else, no one can control you. From now on, how you live and what you can do is up to you. You won't be controlled by others like a puppet like in the past. Whether you think this is punishment, torture, hate me or not, it doesn't matter. That's your choice. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other. Chapter 884. The golden setting sun slowly sank into the forest, giving the surrounding clouds a golden silhouette. The sky changed from blue to white, and from white to red. Finally, the afterglow sprinkled on the earth, turning the lush grassland red. At the end of the Guyland family's territory, there was a raised slope. Standing on it, one could see the house, the farmland, and the woods that connected the valley. When Nightingale was little, she liked to ride on her father's shoulder to climb the low slopes so that she could have a panoramic view of the whole family. Therefore, when her parents' bodies were sent back, and the servant asked her where she wanted to bury them, she chose the slope without hesitation. At that time, although she was heartbroken, she was still a little unwilling to believe that her family had suddenly left. She only thought that if her parents could open their eyes again, no matter where she and her brother were at home, they would be the first to see them. Now that she was in front of her parents' tombstones again, Nightingale had a completely different feeling. There was not much dust on the tombstones. Apparently, someone was still cleaning the place. She bent down and neatly folded a stack of white paper in front of the two tombstones. It was the verdict of Viscount Sommi. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the Viscount's psychological defense soon collapsed. After Roland promised that he would not punish underage children, he not only admitted that he sold Dreamland water, but also confessed the cause and effect of the annexation of the Guyland family. It turned out that the valley that separated the two families' territories did hide a treasure. However, it was not a gemstone vein, but a suspected gold mine. The person who found it was the Sommi farmer. Due to the different terrain, the ravine that was considered a valley to the Guyland family was gradually leveled with the ground in the Sommi territory. Farmers often went downstream to fetch water and bathe. That was until one day, when a lucky man found a grain of gold sand in a mountain spring. He called the others to search for it and fight for it. That was when Sommi's attention was attracted. After that, he immediately blocked the news and sent people along the valley to look for the source of the gold sand. However, the report from his men disappointed him. The searchers did find more gold sand upstream. It seemed that the erosion of the rainwater had caused the walls of the valley to collapse, allowing the floating coarse gold to fall into the water. However, more and more evidence showed that the gold mine was likely to be on the side of the Guyland family, so the exploration had to be stopped. Because of Silver City's special status, the number of knight and escorts that the nobles were allowed to own was more or less limited, so it was impossible to rob the city openly. Viscount Sommi was unwilling to give up on this huge treasure, so he turned his attention to Viscount Gellin. His breakthrough was Old Guyland, a distant relative of the Guylands. The plan was simple but ruthless. He took advantage of the fact that Old Guyland had neither a title nor a fief to entice him to cooperate with him. He promised that as long as he gave him a piece of land, the Guyland family would have a new master. The latter obviously could not resist the temptation of becoming a true noble and agreed to his scheme. So bribed the rats and killed the Guylands while the refugees were rioting. Old Guyland took in Hyde and Nightingale, who were still minors, and began to manage the territory on his behalf. As long as Hyde came of age, it would be easy to force him to give up his fief and title. An heir without protection was no different from a caged bird. Even if other nobles suspected him, they would only think that Old Guyland was too greedy. At this point, it was a foregone conclusion. However, Nightingale's awakening revealed a flaw in the plan. She disappeared without a trace after killing Old Guyland on the day she came of age, and Old Guyland did not get the title he dreamed of until the moment he breathed his last. Sommi had to change his plan. He could rope in Old Guyland, but he could not get everyone in the Guyland family to side with him. After all, there was only one title that he could use as a bargaining chip. He had to use it when it mattered. Ironically, it was Hyde who he finally found. When Nightingale heard this, she thought it was ridiculous. Hyde's property was used as a bargaining chip, and Hyde naively thought that the Viscount would help him. Without much hesitation, he agreed to the proposal of the person who killed his family. With the Viscount's support, Hyde stood out from a group of relatives who were fighting for power and profit. He finally kept his title and became the official heir of the Guyland family. Then, as promised, he merged into the Sommi family. It was not that he kept his promise. After the internal strife, the family's industry was on the verge of collapse, and most of his subjects had been lost. He had no other choice but to rely on the Somi family. After 10 years of planning, the Viscount finally got what he wanted. He even accumulated the huge amount of capital needed to open a mine by smuggling Dreamland water. As long as he found out the location of the mine, the Somi family would have wealth that could last for hundreds of years. However, the appearance of Roland shattered his dream. For a suspected gold mine, he murdered nobles of the same rank and broke up several families. Nearly 20 people died in the vicious scheme, but all he got was a noose around his neck. From beginning to end, he did not even get a glimpse of the gold mine. Nightingale took out a fire sickle and lit the judgment. She once heard from Roland that there was an ancient way of mourning, which was to tie paper into the shape of the object to be passed on, and then burn it with fire, so that the deceased could receive the object. Because of the psychic fire, there was a certain chance that fireworks with special will could pass through the gate of the world of life and death, especially when the two worlds were closest to each other at dusk. Nightingale hoped that through this ceremony, the news of the murderer's execution could be told to the souls of her parents. Although Roland added that he did not really believe in the existence of the world of life and death, she did not care. Rather than saying that he was comforting his parents, it was more like he was comforting himself. By the time she reached the bottom of the slope, the sky was already completely dark. Roland was waiting for her not far away. When she saw the familiar figure, her helpless heart suddenly fell to the ground. Is this really okay? Let that guy leave unscathed. Roland curled his lips. I've wanted to teach him a lesson for a long time. In what capacity? Nightingale raised her eyebrows. He coughed twice. Of course, as a king. Nightingale smiled and shook her head. His business is over, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. If you really want, you can send someone to find him and beat him up again. Since you've said so, then forget it, Roland said as he spread out his hands. Well, by the way. Nightingale suddenly stopped and knelt on one knee. She put her hand on her chest and saluted as if she was swearing allegiance for the first time. Your Majesty, from now on, can you also allow me to stay by your side and serve you? Why do you suddenly mention this? Roland was stunned. Didn't I say it before? But I want to hear you say it again, Nightingale insisted. The string of magic did not tremble in the slightest. It was as quiet and gentle as the earth in the night. It was great to meet him. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.